Calling to order tonight's Monday, March 18th, 2019 Planning Commission. So Rosie, can you take the roll, please?
Sure. Ms. Deeks? Here. Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
Here.
Ms. Humphrey?
Here.
Mr. Rankin is absent. Mr. Wodiska?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Can I get a motion to adopt?
So
this
moved.
evening's agenda? Can I get a second? Okay, got a second? Juice? Yeah, Ross. Got a
Let's
second?
keep this simple.
No speaker series issues. Do we have any receipt of petitions for those items not on the agenda?
No, we do not.
Okay. All right, let's move into item 6A, Annual Planning Commission Work Plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair and Planning Commissioners, in your packet tonight is a draft annual work plan. The request for tonight's meeting is to get a motion by the Planning Commission to adopt that work plan for 2019, and it does carry through the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 2020. Staff does recommend final review and positive action. The work plan was developed based on last meeting's annual planning advance, as well as a little bit of additional work to attach some milestones. So the work plan is organized into 4 general categories. The West Falls Church area, comprehensive plan updates is the second one. Third one is zoning ordinance and future land use map updates. And then fourth is generally transportation.
Oh, okay.
These are the same work items that the commission had identified at the advance, and then staff did some work in between that advance and now to identify those milestones along the way. New this year, the draft work plan also includes planning commission champions. I'm happy to say that system is already in the works. Commissioner Stevens met with city staff and city hall today to talk about the environment chapter, so we are already well on our way.
Wow. On it. Nice done, Tim.
We had a spirited discussion.
Yeah. Arm twisting.
Is that good or bad?
No, it was very good. I appreciated it. It's more work to do, but I think we have that draft plan of the chapter well underway. So
Good.
plan to meet that schedule and maybe exceed it.
Q4,
Right?
calendar year Q4.
Third quarter, I think. Yeah.
Third or fourth, it depends on how it hits. I think third quarter would be optimistic, so I stuck with fourth quarter just in case there are any hiccups.
I see. So this is generally what we developed at the advance a couple of weeks ago.
Mhm.
Does anybody have a problem or questions about the timing? How this? I don't remember us going through the timing. You took the first stab at it, right?
Correct. As far as we got it at the advance, it was to identify the work areas, the work items, and the champions. And then it was an action to staff to come up with scheduling and milestones. For example, on transfer of development rights, it's not clear how long it will take to actually get that on the book. So what staff's recommending is a milestone of let's get something in front of council in the third quarter of this year.
Where is that? Okay. Oh, third.
Second from the
Yeah,
bottom.
I got it.
Same thing with pedestrian connectivity and missing links, getting to a joint work session with the CACT, and there could be a range of things that the commission and the CACT want to talk about. Just by chance, I happened to pass by the chair of the CACT as I was walking to the bus, and she was biking home, and so we were able to have a chance conversation and talk about the possibility of a joint work session.
So generally, it looks like 3 items, with the exception of transportation, which just has a lot of CACT. That's generally where we're at, though maybe a little bit more in fourth quarter calendar year 19.
Yes, that also gives staff an opportunity to revamp. When we hit July 1 is when our new work plans start to go into effect. People are usually clearing action items from last year. Also, the e-scooters, just to highlight, the City Council does need to take action by the end of this calendar year. There was recent state legislation, if the city does not act before the end of the year, then local ability to legislate scooters will disappear. And then they'll be regulated by the state alone.
Okay, no, we talked about that before. I got hit by a scooter on the way over here.
Really?
Like, I was passing and they fell and slammed in my car and tumbled,
Really?
and I pulled over. I was like, "You okay?" And he shook up. I mean, I didn't do anything, but it was freaked me out.
Wow.
He was fine. He's like checking his body, and he tumbled to the ground. It was-
It was an advocacy organization. They knew who you were.
Yeah.
Whoa.
No,
They
it-
staged
Where was
it.
it?
This was on Georgia Avenue.
Oh,
Just like an hour ago. And it's really, he was fine, thankfully, but
And your car's all right?
I didn't even check it. But I mean, he hit it. He tumbled. It was.
I saw a scooter guy hit a tree today. That was pretty funny.
I'm not sure this is what we're legislating, but
It was teenagers. They were driving.
freaked
They
me
were
out.
riding them off the
Well, it
sidewalk
raises the issue of
down
whether
into
you're
a
allowed to
park,
ride and
and one
safety.
hit the tree.
DC struggled with it. I mean, you know,
He got up.
all the jurisdictions have struggled with
That's why it's
scooters.
Mhm.
People leave them all over the
All
place,
over,
and
yeah.
they kind of clog up
Right.
sidewalks, and,
Yeah.
so hopefully the city will pass
You were
something.
down in DC yesterday and it was
Are we
packed
cutting
with
this too
scooters.
close? On
And no helmets,
No, this is not a big deal. Everybody-
unless it was a tour.
I think there are example policies that can be pulled not only from around the region, but other country, or other cities in the country have also had to find a way to blend together all these transportation options.
Okay. All right. Any questions about this work plan? The other exhibits are the pretty chart you put on the board, and then there was a status update on where we were.
That was the same status update that was given at the last meeting of the calendar year in December, I think.
Okay. I don't have any questions about this work plan. Seems reasonable to me. We are not doing anything in Q1.
Of
20.
calendar year 20.
Yeah.
Not currently. There's always the opportunity for things to move up, things to fall back. First quarter is also a tough one just because of organization.
CIP, lots of stuff
There's a
happening.
lot of CIP.
Okay, glad you stopped. Any other questions? Otherwise, we already talked about this at length. We can entertain a motion here. Anyone?
I'll move that we approve the annual work plan for 2019 through June 2020.
Second?
All right. Can we take a roll call vote on that?
Oh, that's, Ms. Dietz?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Fuentes?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Hockenberry?
Yes.
Mr. Rudiska?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Moving to informational items. Do we have any planning commission reports?
I went to a whole bunch of meetings.
Always.
I think we all did. I think we all
I
saw.
hit 4 out of the 5. You
Cool.
can't top
Oh,
that one.
You're the
Yeah.
winner then. I only did 2.
I won.
I'm not sure what the prize is.
I'm not sure either.
We'd be very prepared for our work session. Then.
A bunch of us were at the Founders Row.
Oh, yeah,
Groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So that was good.
that was so much fun.
Yeah.
Other reports?
Seems like there's so much going on, but it's all grouped.
Well, I
within
don't know,
one thing.
since I mentioned Founder's Row, I don't know if staff had, the issue of that emergency construction, has that been completed? The emergency road work?
The
closures?
utilities.
So my neighbors were asking me about that. And were they working like around the clock? I know normally the construction was supposed to shut off at certain times, but my neighbors were saying, I didn't hear anything. People were saying they were hearing work at like wee hours of the morning. And maybe it was related to that emergency work to get it done so they could not have to close the lane anymore. I know they didn't want to have to do that, so. Just a question. I don't know, I was being harangued by some of my neighbors to, like I should know everything that's happening in town. I was like, well, I'll
what,
ask.
You don't know?
I don't know, but I'll
Come
ask.
I
on.
bet you have plenty of time to find this stuff out.
Well, I know who to call, at least, sort of.
Yeah, speaking of that, I've got a big question too. Are, over in the TJ area, they're doing a lot of digging and everything. I don't know if it's it must be stormwater replacements or something, but it's just a lot. And practically 3 or 4 streets over there. And I don't have any idea
Saw
what's
that.
going on.
It's utility work. I don't know which utility it is. It's definitely like either
That's something,
gas
because they're
or
really tearing up
water,
the
yeah.
streets, and the streets are in a horrible shape.
That'd be Dominion.
Really, really bad shape.
I can ask about both of those and,
Okay.
and get answers back
Don't
next
have a
meeting.
full, complete report on that? Yeah.
I do have a positive report on construction. The Howard E. Herman entrance is going in.
Yeah, that
Yes.
is,
Yeah,
it
that's
looks
really
good.
good so far.
Yeah.
So that's good times.
And the tree lights look nice all this week.
Always. Anything else before we move to the next?
I signed up for my educational effort for this year. I signed up for the Congress for the New Urbanism Annual Congress, which is going to be in Louisville this year, and I was pleased to see today that they announced that their keynote speaker is Donald Shoup. So looking forward to that.
I don't know who Donald Shoup is.
Oh, he's the one that wrote the High Cost of Free Parking, and pretty much everyone looks to him to justify changes in the approach to parking in cities.
Okay.
Yeah, they,
Commissioner, I'd be happy to make you the test case for working through reimbursements for commissioners attending
Oh.
professional conferences.
Right, it's not even that expensive either, so I'd be happy to, to do that.
Well, it should include travel as well, so we can work that out.
You should
Glad
take
I-
him up
glad I
on that.
mentioned that.
That seemed like a good offer.
I didn't realize that. That sounds-
We
I'm
can,
going too.
Thank you.
yeah, we can, I can, if we start with the test case, I can work that through finance and see how far I can get.
Thankfully, Mr. Snyder is very aware of this organization.
Yes, he
and,
is.
I'm sure he's aware of Donald Shoup, and
Yeah.
Sounds
so,
nice to me.
thank you.
Mhm.
All right, hearing no other reports, let's move on to the plan director's report.
Very well, thank you. Let's see, it is every other month, and so in your packets today was the fuller Planning Division report for March 2019. As a reminder, we're trying to get these out every other month, and whether it's every 2 or every 3 months is the right pacing. I'm happy to continue to prepare these. As usual, it gives a full depth look at what's going on in terms of budgeting, our 3 program areas, as well as highlights. I just want to touch on the highlights here, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission has. We did submit a grant, the TDM work that the city's been working on. This includes surveying recent development projects and getting a sense of how effective these TDM agreements are being. It's also how I think we're looking to roll out publicity T-shirts for the 3T bus line.
Whoa.
We recently did some mapping work to highlight transportation options in the city. That's up on the website. We're also looking at a rollout of what a pedestrian wayfinding system might look like in the downtown areas, commercial areas.
I'm a champion of that, so I'd be interested to know.
All right.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'd be
To
great.
see what they've already done.
Let's see, transfer development rights, highlighting the fact that we came here for a work session with you all. You guys took action on the CIP. Let's see, we're working on our TLC grant. This will be Transportation Land Use Connections. This will be our second attempt as staff to win funding to look at residential parking rates in the city and whether those are up for an amendment. Let's see. West Falls Church project was referred out to boards and commissions. Aldi had their grand opening. Don't want people to forget that.
Oh, yeah, that was nice.
Yeah.
That was nice. Annual planning advance, Founders Row groundbreaking, and the East End TAP posted the final report to the planning library.
All right. On the next page, I think
Mhm.
there's a heading issue.
Uh-oh.
It says December meetings and January meetings, and it lists those in February and March.
Yeah.
So it took me a minute to figure out what the hell I was looking at, but I solved it.
We caught many updates, but obviously not all of them.
That's okay. Any questions about the planning?
No, but I do have another question. I went on to the coordinating committee site, you know, the one you're on for the.
Yeah, there is a meeting Friday.
I
for
know,
all
but
those who will attend.
I can't find any minutes.
For the campus coordinating
Yeah,
committee.
yeah.
Carly's the one to talk to about that, or I'll ask
Okay.
on
Yeah,
Friday.
She circulated 3 months' worth of minutes, and then that was, I think.
Okay.
a few days
Because I was just gonna see, you know, what other information was there that I
can
didn't
pull
know
that.
about. Okay.
You
I'm
can-
sure it'll pop up
I'll be there on
sometime.
Friday, and we'll get to meet with Mr. Goldman again, so.
That's nice.
Is that the 7:30 a.m. meeting?
Yeah.
Yes. Early.
That's the best one.
Yeah.
Welcome to move
might-
here.
I'd still sleep the
Okay, and what are our other attachments here? We've got our rules and procedures, just our final version here. No action is required on this, right?
Correct. Those were amended in response to the discussion, and those are brought for you, one, to keep as a copy,
Yep.
but also just to confirm that staff did correctly capture any changes.
And where does this now live? Is this on our website, our planning website, or? I think it should be.
Yeah, we can certainly post it to the Planning Commission's webpage.
And we have the ESC annual report. Tim, I assume you have that memorized. And then the TAP final report, which, I think I saw it on our last meeting on the 4th. Did you bring a copy?
I had a copy to show you,
'Cause I-
but I didn't have the electronic one to post yet.
All right, that's it. Now we're on to correspondence. Item 7C.
Yeah, they're the electronic items that were included in your packet, and then also on the dais tonight were comments that had come in after that, which were related to the West Falls Church project. There were two items on the dais tonight. One was the draft voluntary concessions, which were new since package distribution, as well as the 3 sets of staple comments.
Which were new. Is there identify what part are new, or this, or
The whole document.
the whole document's new? I guess I've seen these in a chart form more.
Not even in a chart form. I don't think it was
No?
ever available until today.
Okay. Oh, that helps. In this packet somewhere. Okay. Guide. And, no. So, on one of these items is, Cindy had made a note, I don't know if anybody saw them, but there was 5 adjustments to the CIP after our vote. Largely, it was consistent, as it said here, consistent with the commission's recommendation, but there were 5 modifications: the sanitary sewer rehabilitation, Alexandria wastewater treatment upgrades, West Falls Church and Joint Campus Revitalization District, general government facility reinvestment. All of these increased. And then finally, the school facility reinvestment, that is unfunded.
Is that a result of additional money coming in, or?
I can get those questions over to Cindy. I think what happens is that in some cases, these are facilities that are outside the city's direct control, and as they work through their budget, sometimes that leads to either more or less in terms of funding.
Yeah, I don't know where the
costs.
money came from, but the.
Well, it was the assessment, real estate assessment came in higher than predicted.
That was, yeah, predicted back in November, that's correct.
And that was shared 50-50, I think, with the schools.
Schools, yeah.
Yeah.
And the West Falls Church and Joint Campus Revitalization District, the grant is the same, but just reallocated instead of spreading it out. It's just all in 2020 is what I understood.
It's advanced a year from when we had originally applied. We had applied for the funding to begin in 21, with the bulk of it in construction out years, and then based on conversations with the development team, we've been working at the staff level very positively with the NVTA, Northern Virginia Transportation Authority staff. It looks like it will be possible to move that funding up. Of course, that will be subject to final vote by, of course, both the City Council as well as the NVTA board.
Okay. Yeah, all right, that's the other correspondence, same notes thing. Okay. I think that finishes that section, correct?
Correct.
All right, now we're on to the work session.
If I could, I'd like to start this with a staff introduction by the case planner, Akita Ruzzi, and then I think the intent, since the commission has seen the presentation either last week or the week before, and it's unchanged in its content, that we would go right from the staff report into question and answer.
Well, sort of. We had some guidance from staff that I wanted to deal with first, so that's Q&A, but guided by this. I don't know if you've seen this, those 8 points that the staff was trying to get a handle on. I want to try to answer those first and then go into the Q&A from the group. All right, let's get a staff report.
Akita, good evening, I'm Commissioner Akita Ruzzi with Planning. So I'll just quickly highlight the staff report. Paul did mention in front of you we have the public comments and also a brand new draft voluntary concessions, and I'll go into that a little bit as well. So the site is located on property acquired by the city through the 2013 boundary adjustment agreement with Fairfax County. The approximate land area is 10 acres. It's located at the intersection of Leesburg Pike and Haycock Road. Surrounding land uses include the Virginia Tech UVA Joint Campus, the West Falls Church Metro Station, the West End Shopping Center, and commercial and residential uses. The area is surrounded on 3 sides by Fairfax County. In terms of background, a section is provided on page 4 of the report, and I think staff covered some key milestones last week in their presentation, so I won't go too much into that. Between March and November of 2018, the city engaged in an RFP process in which the development team of Falls Church Gateway Partners, it includes EYA, P.N. Hoffman, and Regency, was chosen. The city authorized the execution of an interim agreement with the selected developer on November 19, 2018. The city subsequently amended the interim agreement on February 11, 2019. The agreement includes material terms. The most relevant to the SEE include limits on overall and unit square footages for residential uses and minimums and ranges on square footages and types of commercial uses. In terms of review and approval process, the proposed development is being processed under the newly created 2-step process. The first step is the special exception entitlement, which we're currently in to determine the layout, heights, and general uses. And the second step is a special exception site plan, which will function as any other special exception and site plan approved under zoning ordinance, and will establish final design of the project. When a special exception entitlement has been approved for a property, development on that property can proceed only after a special exception site plan has been approved. Review of the special exception entitlement consists of 1, referral of the application by City Council to boards and commissions, 2, staff review and review by the Planning Commission and any other boards and commissions, and 3, finally approval by City Council. If approved by the Council, the special exception entitlement will govern all uses on the site, and height, location, uses, transportation, utilities, and infrastructure to be allowed under special exception site plan approved for the property. For schedule, the project was referred out to boards and commissions on February 25th of this year. The Planning Commission public hearing for final recommendation to Council is scheduled for April 1st. The City Council will hold a work session to review staff comments and boards and commission comments on April 8th. Then finally, the City Council second hearing and final action is scheduled for May 13th. Staff comments along with the recommendations from boards and commissions will be reviewed and incorporated as appropriate within a revised special exception entitlement submission prior to the City Council work sessions and action hearing in April and May. Staff has reviewed the first submission, and all the staff comments are also included in the staff report. That's attachment 8. For tonight, I'll just highlight a few key items. As mentioned earlier, the special exception entitlement will define land uses, height, transportation, public facilities, utilities, and infrastructure for the project. So under that, there are several items required for submission and review. First one is density. The comp plan determine appropriate standards would include floor area ratio FAR of 2.5 to 4.0 or higher, 1.2 to 1.5 million square feet or higher, and building heights that reflect the site's proximity to transit and transportation facilities. Total under the current special exception entitlement, conceptual development plan, the total gross floor area for the two phases of development is approximately 1.4 million square feet. The resulting FAR is 3.7 based on the estimated acreage of the overall commercial development minus the shared above-ground parking garage. This is within the FAR discussed in the comp plan, specifically in the Special Revitalization District for Education and Economic Development. The second element is the uses. This is a proposed mixed-use development comprised of several buildings under a two-phase development proposal. Phase 1 includes office, hotel, senior housing, condos, rental apartments, retail, and civic and entertainment uses, in addition to a large central open space. Phase 1 provides approximately 800,000 to 1.1 gross square feet of development, or 56 to 77% of the total proposed development. In terms of building height, the proposed heights vary over the site, with tallest heights proposed at Haycock Road and New Street B, and decreasing heights as the development approaches the school campus, with the exception of the senior housing at 11 stories. Up to 6 stories are shown adjacent to school for the proposed shared garage and hotel building. Overall, the proposed heights are within the maximum height of 15 stories allowed under the special exception entitlement, and are generally consistent with the recommendations provided in the site-specific studies, particularly in the 2017 urban design guidelines. But we are asking the developer to look at the massing and height for the hotel building adjacent to the school building. In terms of parking ratio tabulation for the overall parking is provided on page 12 of the project booklet. Applicant intends to request a parking reduction at special exception site plan. Staff review of the proposed ratios will be provided with your April 1st Planning Commission staff report. For fiscal impact analysis, preliminary annual net fiscal impact projections are based on estimated new unit mixes that is subject to change depending on the ultimate development plan that will be decided during the site plan. For now, between $4.88 and $4.89 million per year is estimated as the probable range of net annual fiscal revenue for phase 1. And finally, staff has identified several key items to address between now and the revised submission, which is listed on pages 1 and 2 of the staff report. Also in front of you is the draft VCs, as I mentioned earlier, was recently submitted. It's under staff review, and at this time it needs additional work between now and the council final approval on May 13th. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. Start the Q&A.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for staff at this point? Not that you won't have another opportunity as we continue the discussion, but.
I was just looking at the voluntary concessions, since we just got it. And,
I was going to actually ask for like a quick overview of the.
oh,
You're
really?
familiar
Oh,
with?
sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no,
We'll do staff
I
questions now, but okay.
was going
I
to
can wait.
ask the applicant to go over these, but if
Yeah,
you thought
I think.
you would be better to speak
I know
about it.
staff hasn't really reviewed it.
Yeah,
I've only
that's
had
what I
a
thought.
chance to glance over it, and if there are questions we can't respond tonight, I'm happy to take questions back and.
Okay, I
bring
mean,
back
I can wait
response,
too,
but-
I'm sorry, I thought you were saying you wanted to do staff questions now, but,
I do, but this I thought I would just take separately.
okay, we can do that separately.
We can do that first, though. I have no problem with that. This is a new document for all of us.
Right, right.
So if maybe just a quick overview of it from the applicant, and then
Okay.
do you have other staff questions? Or no?
No, that's just my one staff
Okay.
one.
That was
All right.
mine too.
So before I said we'd address the first 8 questions here, but maybe since we're all going to have questions on the voluntary concessions, maybe we could just get a sense of what's here and what's in the document and what's generally proposed. I appreciate that this is not finalized.
Excuse me. Oh, it doesn't go down. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you for the record. My name is Evan Goldman. I'm a Executive Vice President of Development and Acquisitions at EYA. So the voluntary concessions, yes, we apologize, those got to staff Saturday. So we were working fairly feverishly on these last week. It's modeled on another recent project in the city where voluntary concessions were granted. That was Founders Row, right? And so we took that and made some modifications based upon largely the negotiated agreement, the interim agreement with the city, which does handle some of these issues within it. and then made a few other minor changes and recommendations. So if you're familiar with the one from Better the Project, some of this will look similar to you, the format certainly. The first page goes through uses, and those are taken right out of our interim agreement with the city as far as minimums and maximums of square footages that we're allowed to build on the site. On the commercial space limitations, I think that's fairly typical that there'd be some retail uses that the city doesn't want to see in the project, and so we've agreed to those. And I don't think we made any changes to those. Design requirements. One change we made, there was I guess in the other application, there was a requirement that all restaurants have ventilation that go through the roof, and we've modified that to all restaurants that require a ventilation of a grease shaft will have ventilation that goes through the roof, but a lot of restaurants don't. Cava, a Starbucks, I don't think a Potbelly has a grease shaft. So it just depends on the type of restaurant. Some restaurants do have grease shafts, some don't. It depends on whether they have a grill. I'm sorry, there's an echo. It's a little strange. But then also we've added the idea of a scrubber. And so that is becoming more common, especially in tall buildings. So for example, in the senior housing building, that would be a 12 or 13-story building. You wouldn't typically have a grease shaft all the way to the roof because it takes up too much real estate within the building. Oh, are you guys hearing that echo too?
Oh, yeah, I definitely.
Okay. Is that still an echo? No, it's still there, right?
Yeah, it's still there.
Should I try? You want me to try this one? Is that any better? Okay, thank you. I agree. I felt like I was like, God, I have a cold. My head is stuffy. Okay, but can you hear me with this one? It works? Okay. So, oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, yeah, you can hear me just because we're sitting 10 feet from each other. So what we've added in here is the concept of a scrubber. And so what is typically done in cities, what's typically done in places with taller buildings, is you create an electrostatic scrubber within the space, the retail space, that cleans both the smells and the grease from the grease shaft, and then it can exhaust it as clean air, in which case it can go through an exhaust like any other fresh air exhaust. And that allows you not to take grease shafts all the way through the building. It also allows you to not spend the money to do that if you aren't going to get a restaurant in that space. So Nobu downtown in DC just installed that. They're all over the city. And so we just kind of reserve the right to handle ventilation on a per tenant basis. Senior housing, building condition, this is modified a little bit just in keeping with our interim agreement, but it does have the 60% requirement of the units being independent, and it also has that the building is not meant for people under 18, and that would be part of the drafting, the covenants of the building. For school capital contribution, and hopefully this doesn't come as a huge surprise to anyone, but the concept here is that the land value and the ground lease payments are actually the school payment to help pay for the school, so there's no additional school contribution. Affordable housing, there's two things in here that are unique that we've requested. One of which is we want to calculate the affordable housing units as 6% of all of the units, including the independent living senior housing units. But then we've asked for the right for the condominium units, and we probably should have included the senior housing units too. I didn't think of that. To be built in the rental building. That's becoming more standard practice in the affordable housing world for a number of reasons, one of which is affordable housing condo units don't create the same supply long-term of affordable housing within the city. Generally, one person hits the jackpot and gets the unit, and then that becomes a affordable family unit for the rest of their lives, and you don't end up having that in the system for other people in need. Whereas rental units turn over more often and more regularly and provide more need for the market. Or a service better for the market that meets the need. The second part of that is you don't have the right through condo law to have a different condo fee for affordable units versus the other units in the building. And so if the affordable condo purchaser purchased the unit, they then have to pay market rate condo fees, which often go on top of what they could normally afford. And so there's been issues in other jurisdictions around the region, DC, Montgomery County, where the people get into the unit and then over time can't afford the condo fee as it escalates. And so that becomes a burden and they end up defaulting and losing the unit. So what most best practices around the region at this point is for condo buildings, jurisdictions are either taking money in lieu, which we've offered in here as an option, or they're putting them in a rental building. We did that at Pike and Rose. They've done that at the Wharf. We would recommend that here as well. it works well when you have one campus where there's going to be affordable housing on the campus, so you're not restricting affordable housing units from being within that community because you want the mixed income, but you're just putting them across the street for their best serve the community. So that's in here. The other concept that's in here was just that when we build the phase 2 condominium building, to the extent we still own the phase 1 rental building, if we the ability to put the 6% affordable units from the phase 2 condo building into the rental building at that time. So when we deliver the phase 2 condo, we would essentially take 6 or 8 of the rental units in phase 1 rental building and convert them into affordable units at that point. So both of those are in there. Sure.
Yeah, in here it also says that each type of ADU will be no less than 85% of the average size
Yeah.
of the market rate. So if you're just saying that you're going to have the option of moving the percent of affordable units at the condo building over into the rental, how does that work out?
So yes, that's a good question. So the way we would see it working is it would be based upon unit type. So if we have, let's say we have 50% of the condo building is 2-bedroom units and 50% is 1-bedroom, totally making that up. But let's say that's what it was. The number of affordable units that we would move over would be 50% 1-bedroom, 50% 2-bedroom.
Okay.
We would then take that over to
Proportional.
the other building, and even if that percentage doesn't work exactly with that other building, meaning the rental building has only 25% 2-bedrooms and 75% ones, we would still do the proportion we would have been required to do in the condo building. Size-wise, that's pretty typical in most jurisdictions. If you have an average market rate unit of 1,000 square feet, the affordable unit is typically a little smaller. And so we would do that within the rental building. It would be based upon the average 2-bedroom size within the rental building. They'd
I
be
may
slightly
be
smaller.
wrong, but I've always thought ours are the same size. You know, Ralph? Always assumed that all the affordable housing units are the same size and the same finishes.
That's not true.
Yeah,
I don't think
well,
so.
okay.
I think we've had some differences.
Yeah, not in my old townhouse community. It was different. I mean, that's townhouse, but same thing. It was clear.
Yeah, our
They were
townhomes,
different.
we do that as well in our townhome communities. The affordable townhomes are typically 14-foot wide townhomes or 15-foot wide townhomes,
Okay.
although the average is typically larger. It's a way to bring down the cost of providing
Oh,
affordable
sure.
housing, so.
The other thing is when you were saying that the condos might have the parking fees go up. One thing I've always worried about is the parking fees of the rentals too with affordable unit. And of course, the best case scenario, they don't own a car,
right.
but still, that has always bothered me.
Right.
Especially adjacent to the metro.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But
Does the
anyway.
senior housing have affordable units?
Yeah, within the independent living units are affordable units. The other units almost act more like healthcare units with the subsidies coming from, their health insurance, so it's harder to deal with
Are they
the subsidy
included
for
in
those.
the
Yes,
part of the calculation?
the independent living units are included in the 6%, yeah. Not the dementia units or the other units, the assisted living units are not. You want me to keep going through the overview?
Yeah, this is helpful.
Thank you.
So that's the ADUs. Pedestrian-oriented design elements, I don't believe we changed anything there. I made one slight difference. Sorry, I wish I had my red line. I don't think there's really any difference here. We've talked about the 10-foot clear pedestrian sidewalk for Leesburg and Haycock, unless there's a cafe, in which case it could go down to 6. And we've maintained the 20-foot distance from face of curb for those frontages. The commons is talked about. Undergrounding of utilities is included in here, which is required. Environmental, so this goes through our requirements or our agreement with the city in the interim agreement for LEED Gold, LEED ND Gold. That's all in here as well. I did highlight solar panels just because I need to. We're just reviewing that paragraph. I believe that's fine. I just need to review it. We also haven't highlighted how many electric vehicle charging stations we would have, but the idea is we'll certainly have them and offer them to our tenants. And so we'll get you guys a number on that as well. Everything else in here is pretty standard and hasn't changed. Installation of vegetation, lighting, transportation improvements, traffic signals. The one thing I did change on traffic signals was originally we would have to get that approved by the city manager prior to getting any C of O. And in our case, given the phasing, we may have, for example, the first rental building might open before the traffic signal for the Hawk signal might not be open yet, just because the timing of delivery of site. So what I said is essentially we'd have a phasing plan that would lay that out so that there wouldn't be confusion as to when we're getting C of Os for different buildings. Street capacity improvements, this talks about Leesburg Pike and Haycock Road traffic signals, and I have added in here the concept of a left turn out of our Commons Drive onto Leesburg Pike towards the city at the request of the mayor. And so we are now submitting to VDOT a request for that to be a full movement intersection. I shouldn't say full movement because it doesn't connect across to Chestnut. But as our Commons Drive hits 7, it would be both a left in, left out, right out. You wouldn't be able to cross because it's not aligned with Chestnut on purpose to avoid that through traffic. But that should help alleviate traffic at the Haycock and Leesburg Pike intersection. And so we don't see any reason why VDOT wouldn't approve it based upon the geometry of that intersection, but we don't want to know that until we get feedback from them.
Back after that might cause back
You like
466, which concern that they would have.
I mean, has there been like a traffic study? I mean, I haven't gotten any copy of that. Has there been like a traffic study? Has there been any type of analysis, a formal analysis, projection of volumes and queuing and like typically one would see? I know it doesn't hit the criteria for like a VDOT formal review, but has there been any type of like operational analysis done on this projection? I mean,
Yes.
that's okay. And has that been shared with city staff and with us? 'Cause I haven't seen that.
Nope, doesn't look like it.
Well, I believe there was, right?
Yeah, there
'Cause
was
I
an
know Gorsley
870
did it.
review prepared as part of the rezoning.
Mhm.
And at that time, the 870, so 870 is lingo.
Right.
It's a VDOT regulation number
Right.
that stipulates, I think, exactly the kind of thing that's being discussed here. The modeling of traffic volumes and traffic loads and justifications for proposed equipment and
Right.
modifications. So the signals were proposed to VDOT as part of the rezoning. VDOT looked at them and was okay with them as part of the 870 and the rezoning. Some of the modifications that were made, I think that the longer deceleration
Yep.
lane for westbound
Westbound.
7 to get into the garage, into the site. We are working with VDOT to make sure that those signals are in the right spot. And we have looked at to the question about 66. This is actually seen as a way to alleviate some of the backup for 66, that the two signals, the new signal along 7 along with Haycock, those could be controlled jointly so that they both hit their left turn phases at the same time, allowing essentially twice as many cars to turn left off of 7 as can today. The other thing that should alleviate 66 is the direct ramp that VDOT is
Right.
building from eastbound 66 essentially to the access road. So suddenly what you'll have is 3 ways when you only had one to get across 7, either heading into the site, heading to the metro, or heading further up Haycock.
Yeah.
But did the 870 model all that? I mean, I mean, I guess, I don't remember seeing the 870. Maybe I
we
did.
didn't.
I must have
We
seen it. I
didn't.
don't know. Did we see that?
There will still be a traffic, I think, signal justification down at the level of synchro analysis and things like that. The 870, we can certainly share that with you. It was submitted to VDOT. It's certainly public.
Right.
We can get that to you.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for everyone to see. I mean, I know for me, it would be helpful to see. And I think to the extent anything was at that level, I just don't know how well they were able to model it without, now knowing the exact mix of uses that are proposed.
Right.
They could
They had-
probably model it.
The uses were
Better.
pretty close. That I think we gave them a model of, what did we give them a model of? What was in the interim agreement?
No, it was prior to that. It was based upon, I think you guys probably, based upon the responses, came up with what you thought the development pattern would be, which was pretty close to what you asked for, and so that's what was submitted to VDOT. And then when we met with VDOT, they have already assumed and generally approved the idea of a full movement intersection and 2 right-in, right-outs, which is what we're proposing. So the good news is when we met with them, generally what we're asking for is what they expected, so there shouldn't be any concern about it from their viewpoint.
Yeah, I just would like to see some analysis because, there's some, right now it's substandard there.
Oh, yeah.
And I know these are some improvements that we're talking about, but there's, I want to see some analysis that, that this will work. I mean, and that
And
will-
these, there was so the 870 review I do want to throw out was paid for by the city. It was not paid for by the developer. The other thing is that the 870 review was not our first look as a community at transportation in the region.
Right.
COG funded a transportation land use connections study that was performed by Nelson Nygaard.
Right.
I think a couple of years prior to this, and it talks specifically about the idea of a local grid of streets, enhanced connections from 66 to the metro, relieving pressure on that Haycock and 7 signals. So the idea of adding more signals is actually the way to reduce some of those problems in Haycock and 7. Moving toward a more pedestrian and bicycle focused grid that allows for folks to move around without their
Yeah,
cars.
and I get that, and I mean, from a big, high level, 10,000 foot view, yeah, absolutely, but I want to see the numbers, and I want to see
Sure, we can share those.
because I know what the backups is there today.
Right.
How much delay there is there. Also, they have that crosswalk right now, obviously, is too close to the intersection, it winds up backing up, when the crossing guards stop traffic, cars queue up and back up into the intersection, making the left, because it's too close. And so we're talking about adding signals. I just want to see how it's all going to function when we add these 1 million plus square feet of more stuff there, to make sure that it will work. Because again, the grid of streets is great, but that's really an internal grid of streets. I've said this before. And I think from an internal urban design perspective, yeah, the grid is great. But for people to access that grid, there's only a couple ways to get to it. It's a grid that's hemmed in on, two sides. And so, people have to be able to get there, and there's really one main intersection that folks are going to use predominantly. I mean, there are a couple other ways you could sneak in there, but I always want to make sure that it will work, especially at, obviously at peak periods. I mean, today it's a major, route for commuters, and Haycock backs up, significantly today without this extra, demand or this extra, the extra trips that this is going to generate. So,
Yeah, I'd happy to address it a little bit further before moving on to the other VCs, but essentially, traffic science is one of those things where, there's a lot of misnomers or a lot of things that people assume that aren't always correct. So, for example, Haycock is already a pretty big road, and so the natural assumption in old traffic science would be let's widen that road and add a lane. And the best way to add capacity to a system is not to add it there, would be to add it on a second street as a grid. And that is because of the ways cars stack. And so if you have a 2-lane road or a 3-lane road, cars don't want to drive next to each other, so they typically pull back, and there's more space on the road, so you get less cars through per lane when you have 2 lanes versus 1.
Mhm.
So the most efficient auto system grid would be a whole bunch of 1-lane roads with left turn lanes.
Right.
You would get the most throughput of any system.
right, we're never going to have that here.
And you're not
So
going to have that, but
we-
what you
we
do
to
have
focus
here
on
is
what we have,
this.
yeah.
What you do have here is this, which is really important. This intersection is backing up. You have cars coming down Haycock, trying to go towards Tyson's, where the major employment center is, right? And you have cars going the opposite direction, trying to make a left here. What will ultimately happen, and of course this is only one leg of it, but we already know what's happening from our coordination with the other 2 sites, is that this is going to continue all the way through. And so what that means is all these cars that are sitting here today waiting to make left turns here at Haycock are literally going to have double the ability to make that left turn, in addition to the fact that when this signal is red, cars could even make left turns here to get through that system and percolate through the grid. And so you've doubled that capacity by just adding, even if with just 1 lane in each direction. And that's the data, that is the numbers, whether you believe it or
Right,
not.
well, I
that's right.
just want to see the 8. I just want to see the synchro, and I want to see the analysis to show that, because I think that those roads aren't being designed to really move cars, and they shouldn't be.
Yeah,
I mean, this is going to be very
yeah.
pedestrian-friendly, low speed, probably be a lot of raised crosswalks, and I mean, it's not really, we don't want to be funneling, I think it might hurt the viability of
Yeah.
the
It
the
makes me
development
nervous when I
to
hear
funnel
that.
the kind of volumes that currently, go on Haycock and 7.
It's both. You want both. I
through
mean, the
those.
retailers want the cars going through in front of them as well, so it's important
Right.
that they function for both.
Right, but if folks know that if they cut through, I don't want to use the word cut through, but
Well-
folks know they have to turn and go through at, 5 to 15 miles an hour through a heavy pedestrian zone, when Haycock, they typically would want to go on the bigger road. And a lot of people in that, who will be going through there are folks that live north of 66,
Mhm.
over towards Haycock Road in Great Falls and Westmoreland, out over in that part of Fairfax County. And because of 66, there's only a few ways to get back over there, and so that's where they're heading. And so I just, again, based on today, we know what it is today, and I just want to see the analysis, to make sure that that these are the right set of improvements. I think there are answers to it.
Yeah.
I think there are things that can ensure that, I think there are ways to engineer it. I'm cautiously optimistic that there are, but I think we need to make sure that that's been looked at. And I understand why the city, for a second you said the city paid for the 870. Sometimes I forget that we own this property. So like I'm understanding like sort of the genesis of it. We're partnering with, these folks. But, I want to make sure that we've modeled it correctly so that we can feel good that this is going to work. So
Absolutely, we
Yeah.
can share that.
We own that hunk of road now, too.
we own a block of it, right? I don't know how that
Well,
works.
we did.
I don't know how it works
We
with
own
VDOT.
part of Haycock.
The city does own the
Right.
piece there,
Yeah.
that if you extend those property lines.
Right. Does that give us some, right, so we actually now own and maintain that block of the Haycock?
Yes,
Correct.
that's why it gets plowed.
Right, so we don't need VDOT approval for some of the improvements over there? Or do-
VDOT controls still the signal itself,
Right.
and the bulk of the intersection at 7 and Haycock. It also controls north of the city section. So there's obviously coordination still ongoing. They also control Route 7 itself along the site's frontage.
Okay.
Just speculation on my part, too. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to this, but, historically, people worked at Tyson's, and they lived in Alexandria and other places like that, so we had all this traffic on 7. But as they build a lot more residential at Tyson's, and people start to get impatient with the driving conditions here, I just wonder over time if there's going to be some settling out of getting people to live closer to where they work, which is kind of what we'd like to see. But that's just speculation on my part. But
Do you want me to just finish? I'm almost done with
Could I
this.
just go with, speaking of coordination, now, I've kind of asked this question before, but I want to make sure I've got kind of the pieces. The 15.7 million that is allotted to the intersection and everything, that's under that budget, but I assume that they are going to be, all that is going to be coordinated by somebody.
Yeah.
And somehow it's all going to work out so that it goes with the transportation plans for this project and for anything for the schools. And also, just the fact that since that is covering that, then you do not need to have that part of it in your budget?
Yep. Yeah, so the MVT, we've already been coordinating with the city on the MVTA
Okay.
grant and with MVTA.
Okay.
We have our own in-house site construction company, and so our head of the site work division has been working with the city on that, and working with all the utility
'Cause-
companies and
yeah,
plan and the schools.
Because we really need that
Mhm.
oversight, since we've got money coming in from different
So
sources.
we would ultimately be the ones responsible for building those improvements for the agreed-upon design that everybody, will approve through the SEE and then site plan. We would oversee the construction of it, the money would come to the city, and there has been quite a bit of coordination on that already. And that is
Okay.
not in our original budget. We always knew that that money was separate
Right.
from our budget.
Which is a great thing.
It's great, it's amazing.
It's a wonderful thing.
Agreed.
Thank you.
So the other items in here, the TDM language is very typical to what you would have seen in the past. I don't think we made any changes there. Bicycle parking, bicycle storage, public art, and this is a question, we've shown a $25,000 contribution here, but what you'll really see is in our infrastructure, our placemaking and amenity plan, which I apologize that you don't have that already. We're hoping to get a draft out by Friday. That will really identify a ton of opportunities and expenditures on art within our public spaces on the project. And so you'll see that shortly. And that will be well more than $25,000 worth of art and placemaking, both in the public spaces and on the buildings. Falls Church Public Library contribution, we have not included a contribution there. Part of that is we are obviously funding the school, which has a new library as part of it next door. But and with the goal of having as much money go towards the school construction as possible, that's not in here. The construction management and everything else in this document is largely mirrors what you saw in the last approval. I'm sure I'm missing a little nit here and there, but generally consistent.
Are we done with that part of it?
I think so. Got other questions about it?
No, I wanted to go back to a question that I asked at the last public meeting about the east-west road. And I asked about whether there were going to be bike lanes, and you said no.
Yeah.
How wide are the sidewalks there and everything? I mean, if somebody's riding a bike through there, are they going to be able to get through fairly
Yep.
safely?
Yeah, let me get to that image. Hold on a second. 3 Haycock 7.
Because I know the kids are not going to go up and go on the bike path past, up there on Mustang Alley. It's
Right,
just
so-
out of their way.
So we discussed this at one of the last public meetings. There's an 8-foot sidewalk here. There's a 6-foot tree pit. You have 2 travel lanes and a parking lane on that street. That's Street A, which is this street. And part of that is, let me go back. No, this isn't working. Sorry. So there's a few things going on here. Street A is largely, because of the slope here, this is almost 26 feet from here to here. So that's a fairly steep hill. It's largely going to be used for loading and parking access, and is not viewed as kind of the street where you're enticing people to. There will be sidewalks. There will be the ability for cars and everybody else to go up that space, but it's not intended to be a bike-oriented street. Street B is much flatter, as is Leesburg Pike. And so
But
on
the-
both, so we have bike lanes
yeah.
on both of these locations as well as here. And so you're right that some kids might choose to do that. I think it will be
They
important.
will all choose to use that.
I don't know. I mean, I think what we have to do is design a project that is attractive and creates the desire for people to do it the way that's most attractive and safest, and the school to communicate that broadly to the students. The students that are going in front of Federal Realty's property have an option of going straight across to the really attractive
Yeah,
bike lanes.
that's true.
They have an option of crossing and going up to the bike lanes here. And to the extent they want to bike up the hill, they can. What's nice about the way these streets are all designed is they're designed for slower speeds. So even if a bike is within the mixed traffic, they're driving at slower speeds. And they very quickly get to the park space at the top, which is clearly designed for bike and pedestrian-oriented space.
Not going slow if they're going down the hill, though. Towards.
True, that's true. They're not going slow if they're going down the hill.
Yeah, they're
So-
just not going to do that.
So,
That's could be a lot faster.
yeah, I don't know I think we have to be careful with good urban design, not to have bike lanes on
Right,
every single street,
right.
and then the buildings get further back, and, you start losing some of that, and I think we want to celebrate the streets where we want the bikes to be, and encourage them to be there, and do that through appropriate signage, do that through education, through the schools.
But I'm just saying,
Part of it's where
logically.
the placement where the bike racks are going to be, because it's,
Yeah.
we're going to want to go
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, that's a great point, if the bike
Yeah.
racks are up here for the high
But
school at the
there's-
top end.
That's going to be the full light crossing, the safest place to cross. And for them to go up Haycock anywhere, wouldn't be safe at all.
Isn't the
no
city
bike
requesting a
lanes.
signalized light now at Mustang Alley
No,
and Haycock? I thought
no,
that was
that'll
it.
be the,
Yeah. The
that'll
city's
be
requesting
the
a
hawk light.
signalized
Yeah, they're
intersection.
proposing a hawk light there, but the
Right.
transportation planning staff is recommending that we have.
But there's not going to be any bike lanes on Haycock. So that's ridiculous.
Well, you have a broad sidewalk on the Haycock as well, obviously
Just saying.
I can't control what's across the street. At some point, there'll hopefully be something there. And maybe that's money, maybe we go back to MBTA and ask for money to
It's
put a
just the
bike
fact
lane
that
there.
that's where they cross right through the giant parking lot. And until the day that we get anything changed, as Paul has told me, we've got some sort of land easement up above the giant property for bike lane or something.
There's no easement, but that is on the city's, it is in the city's bicycle master plan that a future bike route would travel along the back of what is today the service area for that giant shopping center. So
And
as
go all
part
the
of,
way to the WNOD?
yeah, there would be, there might be a bit of a gap around West End Park, but hopefully you would be
That'd
able
be
to punch
great.
through.
That'd be
Yeah.
a nice
And then
Yeah.
you'd make a nice
I
connection.
think
You'd
so,
already be
too.
across 7 and you could just come across.
Right, straight across from, right on up. Because the other thing is that, yep, you've got skateboarders, you've got, you'll have all kinds of, just right down. Particularly with a hill.
I mean, we debated at one point, we wouldn't propose this, but we debated at one point actually having this be a flat street and having this be a flat street and having stairs here and actually having it not be for cars, where you could kind of come in here and go into parking from below and come in on top and enter, parking or loading as needed. And because it's such a big grade separation. And, which would obviously preclude, what you're talking about, and it would make it clear that that wouldn't be a street that people would bike on because you'd have steps. But it also, it kind of hits the grid of streets, it's not connectivity like you kind of want to see in a typical urban location.
And again, it's only 2 times a day.
It is. I don't disagree with your concern. I think the key is that today, there's none of this is attractive today. I mean, I shouldn't say that, the high school is the high school, but there's nothing driving the kids to go in a certain location today, other than the fact that they go in front of Federal Two Shopping Center. And so to the extent this becomes the place to be in front of the grocery store and all the retail, good design can encourage people to have different habits and go in a certain direction. It won't get all the kids, but I think we have our responsibility to try to get them to use the right locations as much as we can. And then you're right, Paul, when this opens behind here, that will obviously encourage
that
people to
would
use
be
the right bike lanes.
phenomenal. Because now all the buses will be coming out onto Leesburg Pike. Instead of going back out today, they turn around and go back on out there and out, which is a huge backup.
Right.
I don't know how the flow is going to work, but it seems to me that you would, if you're coming from Route 7, the only reason you go even into Haycock is because of the way that high school is currently located. If it's over here and this Route 7 has good access by bike, why would you want to even cut in?
Will it have a bike lane?
Yeah, so you have
Well,
a
then
really
that
broad
would
10-foot
be-
sidewalk.
You have a
That'd be
10-foot
great.
sidewalk here. You've got the city, really nice brick sidewalks going all the way east to the trail. So I think what we're saying is correct. If the new entrance to the high school is perceived to be here, which it is, there's no reason why kids would go up the steeper hill versus going relatively flat to the bike lanes.
They're young.
And some will, but, and if they want their exercise that way, they're welcome to. The good news is they will certainly be going slow if they're going up a hill.
I can speak from experience that when I bike to work, I take a route that is 5.5 miles instead of 4 because it avoids hills.
Right.
The hills add up when you're on a bike, and so people will find a flatter route. It's not only easier, but it's also much faster.
I know it's not going to change the plan or anything, I just wanted to really make
Yeah.
note of it because
Sure.
I'm so used to seeing the grand exodus.
Right. Yeah,
On
the
the
other question is whether we
Haycock.
should put, I hate to do speed bumps because it's so not urban, but I wonder if, for your concern of bikes coming down the hill too fast, if you put a speed hump or two, that would
Yeah.
control kids that keep going down the
And frankly,
hill too
the
fast.
good thing is a lot of our kids don't ride bikes.
Or it may just
Yeah.
flip them. That'll be helpful. Well, I think
So I'm
It's
backing
not a good
myself
thing.
right down.
Well, I think it's important obviously this is a 10-acre site, it's fairly tight, and we're providing 2 east-west bike lane opportunities as well as a north-south one, so I think for one project, that's appropriate. It doesn't cover every street, but it covers the use, and then we make the connections as other projects develop, so that encourages people to use those same connections. And if Federal Realty does develop in an urban pattern at some point, which is the goal, that really will force the kids to be either in the front or, as Paul was saying, on the very
Yeah.
back, and solve that problem.
If that light gets not just a hawk light too. But anyway, thank you.
Well, I definitely think, one of the biggest things that has to get right, and I don't think we can really know until we get closer to site plan, is that this flow has to work.
Mhm.
Coming out of the high school tonight, it was a horrible
A
mess.
zoo, a zoo.
And, 'cause I had to pick up my daughter after play practice at like 5:30. And it's, you really take your life in
Oh,
your hands
God,
coming in
yes.
and out of this property currently.
Or going
Well-
into it at night for games.
Yeah, well, it's worse when it's backed up. So, and I know that we're hoping that the changes to 66 and other things will
Yep.
cause that light to let's back up. Also, we really need a lane, we need more lanes that go straight, I think, because people back up in the straight lane trying to make a turn, left turn. I don't know. There's a lot
There's
on
nowhere else,
Haycock,
there's
yeah.
nowhere else to go.
Yeah, they can't get across.
I'd hate to see us add more lanes.
Right.
Okay.
I would hate it too, but right now, fundamentally, I think that we have one lane that is a right turn only, and it would be better
Right.
if it was straight and right.
Right,
Because people back up in
That's
the
true.
other lane is the lane that goes across, but people back up in it that want to turn left.
Absolutely.
So then no one can get across, because
Right,
they're being
right.
stopped by the left turners.
yeah.
So
And that really
I think
backs
it's
up.
really, it would be good to, and maybe this is part of this bigger study anyway, but it's really good to look at, we have these 3 lanes right now. We have a turn lane, we have a straight lane, and we have a right turn lane. And I don't think that right turn lane is being utilized. It's mostly empty.
That's something we need a traffic study.
Right, and that's why we
So we
need
need
traffic
data.
study. Right, right.
I mean, we can all
I
kind of
know.
anecdotally talk about what we see and think, but we need like the professionals to prepare
Well, that's
something
why-
Yeah.
with data so we can see what is projected to happen when we add this 1 point whatever million square feet of stuff to the existing conditions, which are already maybe not working ideally. So yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, but I
completely
think
agree.
And
we have
in
those
our
2
future
lanes,
up
we should look
above.
at how we're using
Right.
them, and I don't think we're using them as well as we could right now. Because otherwise, the right turn lane wouldn't be empty, while the other 2 lanes are clogged up and can't get anywhere.
Mm.
But the other thing I continue to be concerned about is when the school buses are there blocking School Road, is how people are gonna get in and out of MEH. And I know that we're gonna work on that, because if you're dropping off at MEH and you cannot, currently, most people drop off and then go back through the site and come out on Haycock. Very few people want to take a right and head to Tyson's, and there's no ability to
Make a left-hand
U-turn
turn.
at any point until
Yeah.
you're pretty far down the road. Or you turn into Idlewood and you turn in Idlewood and come back out, if you're forced that way. So I just think we have to really think hard about how MEH's drop-off is gonna work. Because they're blocked by the buses at that point.
Yeah, so obviously that's not my purview, that's the
Right.
schools, but
Right.
their intent is to hold the buses here and have it function. This would become a right-in, which it isn't today. That would be a curb cut. You can see
Yeah.
the
Right.
decel lane.
The one good thing is
So cars
cut
would be able to
through
do that
traffic
movement.
on the School Road, AKA Mustang Alley,
Yeah.
will not cut off the schools from the practice fields and everything, because today they cut through and just zoom right on through
Right.
with the kids having to cross there to go to the fields.
Yeah, so I don't know how, I assume the schools feel comfortable with what they're proposing. It's, I can't really speak to
Yeah.
their thoughts on that, but you're right in that it would send cars out to the right.
Well, as long as there's a
To go
chance to
around the
make a
loop road.
left-hand turn.
Yeah, if you can do a left-hand turn. But I mean, I think that's just, and I know that, like you said, it's really more the schools, but it's part of the bigger traffic flow of this whole site.
Right.
Because that's the morning, but the evening's a whole nother mess of people having to be picked up and dropped off and events.
If I could, just sort of I took the draft, so as you start spending more time on the VCs, keeping in mind that the level that you're working on now is approval of the conceptual framework. A lot of these, most all of these questions won't be answered in any detail.
Right,
I
right.
know.
So I also say that as a way of helping you deal with this incredible accelerated schedule.
Right, right.
So keep that in mind when you go through this. So you're not going to see the level of detail here. If you line this up with the Founders Row VCs, you'll see that it's just, for example, uses. There's a lot of language in the Founders Row about the movie theater, and we don't deal with a specific use in here. But what you do see at the very beginning is the reference to the document that you have, the Bible, so to speak, and most importantly, the provisions in there about the minimums and the maximums. That's what you want to pay attention to in this framework. So I'd say keep all of these questions not just in mind, write them down.
But that's why we're saying them.
And-
Yeah.
Just
and
for,
we're
because
doing the same thing.
we don't want to get too far down the road and not have mentioned
And
it.
Oh, yeah, well,
Yeah.
and we've got, and so one of the statements in here is that we're promising that what we will do is that in the following SESP, we will have provisions that will accommodate what you're talking about now, that it'll be in substantial conformance with this. For example, like you said, Street A could end up being with stairs, because that's the way that it should work. So that might help you when you go through here. And if it's something, Paul, you know, that you know, as you go through the same thing.
Let me amend that a little bit. So,
Please.
so
I think you can still use it. with
yeah,
that.
no, let me amend that. So that is correct for the a lot of the VCs, for some of the VCs, that there may be more detail added at SCE site plan. But the assumption is that the VCs that are approved at SCE are the VCs for the project. You know, I think one of the critical things to remember in this process, and we'll talk about this as it involves traffic and land planning as well. You know, our team will be paying $6.5 million of land value in June, based upon the assumption that we have an approval that we can build and generally know what it's going to cost us. So to the extent there are concerns about traffic and intersections and road design and the things we've generally shown here, that has to come out between now and May 28th, because we can't be negotiating those at SCE site plan.
Right.
It's one thing to negotiate materials and architecture and things of
No,
that
this
sort.
is it. No,
This is it, because we need to
It's
know,
quick.
we need to know come May whether we have a project that makes
Right.
sense economically.
Right.
So,
And I
so
think
things
that-
like that, Street A, where Dave is correct, we may come back to all of you and ask your permission at SCE site plan to amend the SCE and say, we think we found a better way to do X, Y, Z, and have that, and open that can of worms and have that debate with all of you. But that's, you guys would 100% get to weigh in on all that. But to the extent we aren't changing anything that we're getting approved here, this is what we are going to build. And I don't want there to be an assumption that, 18 months from now, we're having a debate where
We
we
do.
say, get rid of that road or get rid of this road, or, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Okay.
And I think, I think we're flexible. If you come back and you have a better plan, we'll be happy.
Right, that's what we assume.
But
And I
at
also
least you
think-
got it in mind.
Right.
We have a lot of balls in the air, and that we have this study, this
Yep.
grant, this everything that has to be dealt with, and so we don't really know what's gonna happen, but I just wanted to throw that out. Is it good to ask another question about VCs right now? you
Sure.
think?
I
Okay.
was just gonna do that too.
Well, I beat you to it. So, in the design requirements, I'm fine with the scrubber and all that stuff that you explained earlier. That made sense when I read it. I don't have a problem with that. What I'm wondering is, what will one of these retail spots look like when someone gets in it? Are we talking about just the box? Is there gonna be an easy availability to punch into electric and water and stuff
Mhm.
like that? I mean, we've had buildings built where people had to take down walls,
Yeah.
and walls they didn't, walls outside their own, their
Yeah.
own section to get to stuff. God, that place.
Yeah, we'll have a set
Can
of.
we have that in the VCs? What those would look like, like in terms of
I think something
access?
like that would come at at site plan. Because
Site plan?
we'll- yeah,
Okay.
because we'll have more detail on the retail at that point. But the assumption, what typically gets done, what I've done in my past history working at retail-oriented companies, is you would have a few different options for the retail tenant depending on how sophisticated they are. So for a big national restaurant, you're gonna give them a cold dark shell, and they're gonna do everything, including the storefront. Now, we
Okay.
would have full rights to approve it, and we would have storefront guidelines, signage guidelines, and design guidelines that make sure that they do it the way we want it to be done. And then from a utility perspective, for every tenant, you give them as part of an exhibit in the lease, the location to their premises where the gas, the water, the heat, everything
Okay.
comes into the space. So we'd be providing all the utilities to the space. They would then
Right.
run it within their space.
And that's my main thing, because when I hear about people having to break walls and then another wall to even get to utilities, it seems kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so that typically happens more in re-tenanting. So when we're delivering the initial space, it's a raw
To
space.
the-
Typically, you have all the flexibility in the world
To the original
to
tenant.
the original tenants. It's much easier.
Okay.
It's then when tenant A and B move out and somebody wants to reconfigure the space, that is an issue that has to happen.
Right.
But what you provide the tenant with, a tenant improvement allowance to fund those costs typically. I would say here what we will probably have is, for the larger tenants and the more sophisticated tenants, it'll be a cold dark shell delivery and they'll do all the work with our
Right.
approval. For the smaller mom and pops or smaller stores, we'll offer typically what's called either a warm white box or a warm lit box.
Okay.
And what that is white means painted walls, warm means it has HVAC, lit means it has lighting, sometimes you'll provide a bathroom. So there'll be different packages. That tenant might get less tenant improvement allowance from us because we're doing more of the work. And whereas the tenant that's getting a cold dark shell might get more tenant improvement allowance. And then storefronts as well, for the less sophisticated tenants, my assumption is we would be designing the storefronts for them. Versus the bigger tenants, we want them to express their brand on the storefront. So that is an area when we get into SE site plan where we will request a lot of flexibility on what you're approving 15 or 16 feet down on storefronts. And we will agree to the extent you want it, a series of storefront guidelines, so you know that you're gonna get high quality. But I'm not saying, the last thing you want, or at least I would wanna do, is say, I don't know who the tenants are gonna be, so we're just gonna do a 12-foot high, glass storefront.
Right.
And then all the retail looks the same and it just doesn't really work. So we can work on that at SE site plan with all of you, make sure that you have a sense for what you're gonna be getting and then have that flexibility.
And we just want, and I'm sure you feel the same way, we really want the retail to fill.
Yes.
And, but we've had this problem here where obviously, and it's not just us, I've seen it in Arlington as well,
Yep.
and you've talked about some of Arlington's choices and where they haven't, where, we get the residential filled, but the retail takes forever, and all you hear back from people, it's the
Yeah,
build out.
yeah, yeah.
Can't do
Yeah.
it, the
Yeah,
build out's
yeah.
too expensive, the build out. And
I mean,
that's what,
it's either build out or, I mean, the way you should look at retail is it's a gross amount of money that a retail tenant can pay per month. All in, including their rent and how they can capitalize those upfront costs that you're talking about
yeah.
with debt. And that's kind of the number they should be expected to pay. So it's either that the rent is too high or that the build out is too high. But the
Lots
city
of
has
times
not,
both.
the city has not had a lot of projects delivered so far with this much concentrated retail.
Right.
And that's how you attract
More retail.
success and more retail is by having a lot of it concentrated in locations and that's why East and West Falls Plaza for Federal Realty over time, has generally been successful because they've got concentration of retail. So that we're very confident about this retail.
Okay.
Okay, something I just wanted to mention that I will go and talk with city council members about. In the prohibited uses, I really think we need to prohibit tobacco vaping stores. I think we've got 2 now. And
Sure.
I certainly would not like to see any more, but I plan on bringing, and if this isn't, and
I'm fine with
this is what it was for Founder's Row,
Hopefully your rents can
that should be.
include the vaping stores.
That
but
should
we'll see.
be renegotiated with Founder's Row, because
And this might be just a legal question to explore, but I think with the SEE, the SEE sets the list of allowable uses. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right.
And so in some, I'm not sure if we even still need this prohibited list. I'm not sure that there's a problem with belt and suspenders, but it may be that these things are.
SEE. So we have to, originally the ground lease was supposed to have a merchandising plan with
Mhm.
potential types of tenants. We haven't gotten that far in the ground lease yet.
No.
Okay, so it's, got it. So
So
the
it's
SEE
separate.
is speaking to uses and this is
Right.
got it.
I mean, I would we have no problem keeping the prohibited uses in. I mean,
Yep.
we wouldn't want to do any of those anyway, and so I have no problem with that at all. And actually, it helps us, if we, there is a condo building, so to the extent that retail ends up being sold to another owner, we would want those restrictions in there anyway for them, so that's fine.
And on the prohibitive use, this is a staff
sorry.
question actually, but, I was kind of surprised that we're prohibiting things like amusement arcade. Not that we're gonna get one standalone or anything like that, but, or the roller rink. I'm telling you, if we could get a roller rink, it would be wonderful, because right now,
They're hot.
if you wanna go roller rinking, you have to go to Manassas. Or it's Manassas or somewhere in Maryland, I think
Because they're so
Rockville.
big,
they're huge.
Yeah.
they need so much room, they can't
They're
afford the rents.
huge.
you know,
Well,
generate much.
The only other choice is Arlington runs one in one of their gyms for part of the winter,
Uh-huh.
but the line to get into it is like an hour and a half if you don't get, you have to come an hour early if you don't want to be in the line for half of the time. That's how much people want to roller rink. I just want to put
We
that
need
out
to
there.
repurpose a below-grade parking deck at some point when
Well, I was just
we're
saying,
driving
you
last
have
work
the
well.
tops of lots of buildings.
Or, yeah, roofs, it's cool.
They used to,
We will not be doing a roller rink here.
they used to
No.
be able to
That
roller
is not-
skate
No
over
roller
it.
disco.
I know we're not, but you know what? If we could do a roller rink outside on the plaza in some way, that would be really cool. Because that's basically what Arlington's doing. They just take a gym, stick
Uh-huh.
some cones on it, and make it a roller rink.
That's so interesting.
And it's sad. It's a sad roller rink.
Well, we used to be able to have roller skating over in the before we redid the community center.
Yeah.
It was
Were
a
you
big
going with your
deal.
VC questions?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So
Thank you.
What I want to do now is go through these 8 items that are in the staff report. They need this guidance to help us with our motion that's coming up in our next meeting. So you have this in front of you.
Mhm.
So the first thing relates to the hotel height and massing.
Yeah.
I'll just read it here. The hotel height massing changed from the RFDP proposal. Current proposal shows taller height, 6 stories for the entire hotel elevation at Block C along the school road. Previous proposal shows a step down that provided a lower height of 3 stories, this elevation adjacent to the school.
Yeah, so I can answer that question. In our revised submission, you'll see a shift of this bar of the hotel. So the purple is the hotel rooms above. That's going to shift either to be a T, where it's here, or slightly further towards the commons. I don't think we'll be all the way to the commons. And remember, obviously, at SE site plan, you'll have the chance to approve this again with the final locations of the actual buildings and the design. But we will be moving that away from the school plaza. And we shared that concept, or we haven't shared a design with anybody because we don't want to confuse anything right now until we resubmit. But we did tell the school board that that's our intention as well. So that would limit the backside of this building to essentially a 2-story retail building with the civic space on the second level and the retail on the first floor in the hotel lobby.
You're shifting it because of staff.
School board has asked us to shift it further from the entrance to the school, that they don't want a tall 6-story building here. And so that's shifting over further. And then what we've also offered is, to the extent this area here needs to be in the, here, I'll show you the exhibit. I have it here. So in this exhibit where we talk about the maximum heights for the different buildings, we'll actually break this hotel height and lower the portion that's closest to the school to a lower height than what's allowed by zoning, so that it restricts us from ever even asking for it to be higher there. But the intention right now is for this to be a 6 to 7-story building in total, with the hotel bar further away from the schools. So hopefully that'll resolve that issue.
When I was talking to the architect from Torty Gallis, can't think of his name.
Brian or Murphy?
Yeah, Murphy. And saying that even if that were flipped totally with the main part of the hotel over on the commons, that way that the public spaces and the entertainment and the music school or whatever you're going to have there would be opening up into a bigger space for possibility for concerts.
So our thought right now is, remember, those are second floor spaces. So the thought right now is, if we split it or have it slightly off center,
Yeah.
we'd be able to create a second floor open space that faces the commons, as well as a second floor or third
Okay.
floor open space that faces the school.
I think it could be really
So
more
it could be great for
creative
both.
to open up visually and spatially to
Mhm.
different
Yeah, we
areas.
want it to both, because you want that energy on the common side as well.
Mhm.
And we've actually been, I think I modified this in the VCs. Generally, we're going to have 18-foot floor-to-floor ceiling height for all the retail here, which is, kind of a typical retail height. We may actually go slightly lower here, because we want the second floor outside music deck to be closer to grade, and have the music be more visible up there and the activity more visible. So that might be a 15-foot floor-to-floor space instead of 18. So that's something, I think in the VCs, we took that language out. You had a restriction on, you couldn't be less than 16 clear inside any of the retail spaces. That'll generally be true, but we will have places where we're going to do stuff for effect that may lower it. So that's important to keep in mind. If I didn't catch that in here, I'll modify it. But that's one of the spaces where I think we will do a lower retail height specifically to get it closer to grade. And by the way, that I should share that too. There had been, for a period of time, if you think about retail historically, in the bottom of almost every building in New York City is retail with, 10-foot clear and 12-foot floor-to-floor ceiling heights, right? Has been typical retail for almost ever. And then there was this big, movement for 20-foot high spaces. Oh my God, has to be flexible for any type of retail in the world I could ever put in there, including a mezzanine. And the truth is, as you see retailers fit out in almost every space, they lower the ceiling height to about 14 or 15 feet because it's just too vacuous, with the exception of some, crazy restaurants that do really cool mezzanines. So we're wasting space. We're disconnecting the uses above from the street too much by 20 foot high. we're creating these places where you have this big band of brick with nothing on it from like 16 foot to 23 feet where there's no windows because you're above where where the retail space wants to be. So there is a movement now to actually get more to 16 or 18 floor to floor and be more responsive to what retail needs really are. And then when you have a space that needs to be 20 foot or like the grocer that needs to be 20, 23, you make sure it's the appropriate height for that. So we've gone with 18 here because we think that gives us good flexibility. In some spaces, we may go lower.
Fads can change.
Fads change, exactly. And it's less space to heat and cool. It's better from an environmental
Right.
perspective, so.
Okay, the next one is alternate plan. Potential alternate plans related to the
Right.
senior housing and office locations referenced in the current submission should be provided for city review and
Yeah, so I'll share that. So I don't have the plan itself with me, but we had shared at one of our meetings with the schools, we had a series of regular coordination meetings with the schools. And at one of those meetings, we had shared, they had objected to, in our initial submission to the city, the senior housing building went all the way to here. It hid the entire garage. And I think some of the school board members didn't realize that was part of our RFQ submission, because they were looking at it, they assumed it was only on the ground level that we were hiding the retail. They didn't realize that the entire building went up and hid the garage. And so when they found that out, they were objected to how close that building got to the school itself. And so we came up with some ideas. One was cutting that back, which is as it's shown here, where the senior housing is pulled back and only covers half the garage. The other garage would have art and placemaking. We came up with a version where this was just fully exposed as garage, and we got rid of that finger altogether. And we had a version where we actually put the senior housing down here and put the office building here. We shared that with them. It was too preliminary, quite frankly, because it just wasn't all worked out from a plan perspective. And you can see, given how small this parcel is, it would be hard to make a marketable office building work there.
Yeah,
The city also pushed back because they want the commercial office on
Yeah.
Route 7 so that it shows that this is an
Absolutely.
office market, not senior housing. And so we've gone with this version, which is where we cut back the senior finger further away from the school to give them the space they need. But we've kept the office building on Route 7, and we just haven't really shared that plan again since then. That said, at SE site plan, one of the conditions of this approval is that there is flexibility to shift buildings and uses. So for example, if we got I don't even know what would do it, but at Pike and Rose was different than this, but we had we had an office building in the middle of the property. We ended up getting a bigger hotel than we had expected, and we swapped the office building with the hotel location, but we got that approved at site plan from Montgomery County. So we may come back to you, as I said, with better ideas. We may come back and say, this makes more sense, this should switch here, or we got a retail tenant that wants to take the first 2 floors of a building and it changes the geometry of this, and we would get that approved by all of you at CC site plan.
What's the height of that building, the
Which one?
senior?
So this is 11 stories here, and it drops to 6 stories here. So it
Okay.
just covers the garage.
So what'd you do with the space you lost?
So that building got taller. So the senior housing building got taller. And we are looking at, we're looking at other options for where the senior housing might want to go on the property, which might be something at SE site plan that we come back as a change. But right now that we can fit the program we need on that parcel like that.
That would give the senior housing an outdoor space too.
Yeah,
On
they have outdoor spaces. This would be their memory care unit, and then they would have outdoor spaces up on the rooftops as
Right,
well for
right.
their tenants.
Because that's what we had to change for the Kensington.
Okay.
The school board would rather see the parking garage than have the building too close to the school.
Yeah, they like the idea of, well, I think there was more concern about uses, this concern about senior housing residents being able to look out towards the school kids. And then there was a concern about, I think they liked also the idea of having the graphics on the garage itself, fronting the plaza from an art perspective. So that was kind of a compromise position. And to the extent we're able to come up with a plan that gets rid of the finger altogether, and we would come up with a really great marketing and frontage for that garage regardless, but we haven't figured that out.
Has there been any more, isn't there some discussion about the garage and the status of the garage, and has there been any more activity as far as that, resolving that issue?
You'll see it, I think, what you may be talking about is the subdivision application. So
Right.
there is a subdivision application wrapped up as part of the 10-acre and the high school process, and that will be coming before the planning commission. You all do have final say on subdivisions. That'll be coming before you, I think, at the same time as this 10-acre SEE, as well as the high school site.
And the point of the subdivision, refresh my memory, because isn't there some issue related to
The garage.
the percentage and what the garage is used for by who? So can you share any information on that? Anybody? I've heard about that, but I haven't heard anyone actually explain to me what the debate is, what's the situation, and where we're going on it.
So it's less about that, it's the fact that so obviously the economic development project parcel would be something like this. It would not include the garage.
Right.
And it's well below the 10.38 acres that is allowed for the ordinance. And even including the garage, it's still below the 10.38 acres. But what the desire for the garage to be a separate parcel lies more in the fact that if and when there comes a time where parking is no longer needed, the school, because of autonomous vehicles, the schools would like this to revert to them as an academic parcel versus an economic development parcel. So the plat shows a rectangle essentially around the garage and then the rest of the economic development parcel. And then we would have easements that allow for the uses to happen the way it's shown.
That, you understand that now? Or no?
I think I do. I know the county has the county commented on that? Hasn't there been some issue because the county obviously is a party to the agreement? Hasn't there been?
70-30 issue? Or?
Yeah.
Right, the percentage issue, the breakdown as far as from the
Right.
transfer of the land.
Yeah, I would follow
Usage.
I think you should follow up with Wyatt or to get an answer on that. He's been really dealing with the county on that issue, not me.
Correct. Correct. Obviously, it's a lot of staff are playing a lot of different roles in this, and that coordination on making sure that the arrangement of the subdivision and the 10 acres and the high school meets the standards laid out in the agreement is being worked out through the city manager and the city attorney's office.
Okay.
But we can certainly get you an update, and we can provide that as part of the subdivision application.
You mentioned autonomous vehicles that made me think about Uber and Lyft.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna have a specific place for pickup and drop off?
Yeah, we have two. So one of the beautiful things about this school
Yeah.
drop-off turnaround is that it then makes a great weekend Uber meetup
Right.
place as
Right,
well.
the
So that's one place. The other place would be it's drawn like an alley, but the idea for this space is for it actually to be a cooler, almost a one-earth-like space. And so that would be another location where it will be a less traveled space that people can meet up. And we haven't fully designed what that is. You'll see that more at SE site plan, but we have some thoughts about what that might be and how that could become cool. And then the other part is because we're required to have 20-foot clear in both of these drive lanes, even though the drive lanes themselves are only 10-foot clear, you have a bike lane and then a kind of a paved space on the other side of the bike lane. So even if Ubers are stopped on Commons Drive, it won't fully stop traffic. You'll have
Right.
the ability to get around the cars. So it won't be intentional. It will be designed in a way where it doesn't make it look like you should do that, but people will do it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think there's always someone who's gonna break the rules, but if you designate certain places, like, so
Right.
at National, at the stadium, like, there's only certain places you're allowed to be picked up.
Right.
And so, that gets that traffic away from
Yep.
there. Okay.
All right, let's talk about the placemaking and amenity plan.
Yeah, so the placemaking and amenity plan, I don't think this has slides related to it. So we should have a draft by Friday. We've been putting it together and we'll share that with all of you. I apologize that that's coming later. And then once you've seen it, to the extent staff feels like you need more time to review it in order to approve that separately, that's fine as well. But essentially what it does is it's an 11 by 17 page for each of the major placemaking elements. So art and sculpture, landscape, lighting, canopies. I said art and sculpture, right? Yeah. Water fountains and water features. Retail, maybe the retail kiosks or pavilions, depending. Parking garage graphics. So there'll be a page for each of these placemaking oriented elements, and there'll be a collection of images of the types of items we'd like to do. So for benches is one. So for benches or street furniture, there'll be 6 or 7 photos of the types of items we might want to do, and there'll be a paragraph that describes our intent. At the next level, when we come in for SEE site plan, we'll take that and amend it further with more detailed drawings as we've developed the placemaking. And we'll say, for example, we'll have a plan that shows, this blown up and this blown up. And unlike a typical site plan where you literally say that bench goes right there, it'll say we will have 3 benches on this block that will generally be consistent with these images. We'll have 5 benches on this block that will be generally consistent. We'll have 6 trash receptacles. So all the things you want in the project, we will agree to those as binding elements in our SE site plan, but it will allow us flexibility to move them throughout those public spaces as we further design it. And then what we typically do, or we did at least in Montgomery County, is we then had a quarterly meeting with staff to give them an update on all those elements. And most of it is things that they could just approve at the staff level if we substituted things. And in that case, we actually did 2 of those meetings, and it was very apparent that we were going well above and beyond, and so they were just like, just go do it, it's great. And we didn't have any more meetings. And we well beyond performed, obviously, at Pike and Rose. So that's what the placemaking amenity plan is about, and what it is to give the general public and all of you the assurance that you're going to get a great place, but to give the flexibility that's required to create a great place. So we're going to create a story for this development. We're going to have ideas for murals and artwork. I don't want to tell you in 18 months what that mural is going to look like. I want that to be something that we develop over the next 3 years and come up with the right decision. And those are all going to change, right? We're going to come up with the architecture. The art and placemaking is going to be responsive to the architecture, so we have to get the architecture approved in order to create some of that. So that's the general concept, but you'll see the first draft, and I think that'll answer a lot of these questions. And then to the extent you need more time and that can't be approved by May 28th, I don't think if that gets approved a month later, that's not the end of the world. Ideally, it would be approved with the SEE, but it's not. I don't think any of us are worried that we're not going to live up to expectations there.
Have we used these before? Is there any precedent in the city for the placemaking of the amenity plan?
I think this is an attempt to work with the adjusted approval schedule. So typically, by the time we get to approval of a special exception, we would have already laid out a conceptual development plan, and there would be little discussion on the bench standard because it's on a public street and it would look like the city streetscape standard. Same thing with streetlights and trash cans and bike racks. What's different here is that these are intended as private streets, and also the approval is happening, at least the special exception phase is happening on a quicker pace. This idea of essentially a storyboard for each element has been used in other communities that have done this kind of approval process, and this is what we're
But
borrowing.
not here, we haven't.
We haven't done it here, no.
We were the first ones to do it in Montgomery County as well. So that was a new experience for them, and then it's been copied now by a lot of other developers since we did it.
I think it is a positive model to show examples with some text that explains what's trying to be captured, and that allows for refinement at site plan.
Agree.
Great.
Steve?
Question,
Mhm.
bringing up private streets. I'm thinking, okay, private streets. Who's going to be responsible for all the plowing, for snow removal?
Us.
Even on the school road?
No, the school road would be, that's
That's still
in the
school.
school.
That's
So the school would be
still.
responsible for that.
And on street B?
Street B would continue to be, that's not part of our development parcel.
Right.
And it's a good question. We need to
It's a
figure out.
good question because,
My assumption is the schools are going to want to plow that because they're going to want to control that the
the
buses
city,
can get
the
in.
city really moves out fast on stuff
Right.
like that.
Although
And-
quite frankly, when there's snow, the schools are more likely to be canceled than our retail's not going to. Our retail's going to open, so in most retail projects, the developer's going to control the plowing because you have a requirement to have the streetscape clear for your retail
And
tenants.
then the sidewalks on school side would be the schools, and
Yeah.
anything on your side would be your side.
Yeah, and it may be that
Okay.
we
Just
contract
thought
to the
it'd
same
be a
contractor.
Nice, good thing to ask.
Okay.
Now we're on to phasing plan. This is
Yep.
this item and the next one is both phasing plan.
Yeah, so we will correct this. So it's a little bit hard to see. Let me see if I have a better place here. So this was a question of the fact, so our retail in our interim agreement with the city includes the square footage for the grocery, the civic uses as well. So it's 134,000 square feet of retail includes those uses. And I think, let me see here, did we break it out? We have retail, grocery, we have civic, on block, hotel, retail. Yeah, so we did not break it out here as civic versus retail. So we'll do that in this chart in our next submission. And so everywhere from now on, you'll see retail, grocery, and civic broken out separately. They'll total to the 134,000 that's in the interim agreement, but they'll be broken out separately.
I think that's what they're asking for.
And we'll do the same for unit count. So for condo versus rental, I think we had it all as multifamily here. So those will get broken out as condo and rental as well.
I'm going to refer back to a question I asked at the last, that whole area of Phase 2 will be used for staging for
Yes.
your Phase 1?
Yeah, that's being negotiated as part of the comprehensive agreement with the city, is to allow that to be used for staging. We're actually requesting that it also be allowed to be used until we move forward with Phase 2 for potential other uses, events, festivals, parking, things like that.
Right, right.
So the next items, so I'm a little confused about this one. It says proposed timing of construction as related to the construction of phases for each element that ensures that commercial uses will be constructed should be provided during SEE. So since it's a big, I mean, it is 2 phases, I know. We know that Phase 1 is the vast majority of it. What are we trying to get at here? Or maybe you guys know and
So-
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so the interim agreement talks about it a little bit, generally speaking. It's not reflected in their SEE packet, so we're looking for some phasing information, timing of when they think they're going to construct a second phase related to Phase 1. That is part of the required application materials that was stipulated in the code, so it's just looking
Got
for
it.
some specifics in the SEE
Okay.
booklet.
So I think, so that is something that's being negotiated in the comprehensive agreement. So there is, and we've just started the negotiation of the comprehensive agreement, but it's going well. We have a draft that we shared with the city last week. There's certain elements that are in the SEE from the interim agreement, and there's certain elements that'll be in the comprehensive agreement. And I think largely we're not repeating them, we're having them in one or the other. So that there's not less chance of conflict between one versus the other. So timing and phasing and all the Phase 2 timing and phasing is very clearly laid out in the CA. So maybe that's something more for Wyatt to make sure that it gets into one of the 2 documents versus the SEE, I think.
We can study that.
Yeah. Or if there's some notes you want pulled from the CA once we have it negotiated to the SEE, that's fine. I'd rather let's get it right once and then pull it, so it's the same exact language versus have it be a chance that it might be slightly different.
I mean, it may be something that we can reference, right? The SEE would stipulate
Right.
phasing to be as described in the CA.
Right.
That also gives a good chance that there's a marker in the SEE, so that, or I'm sorry, in the VC, so anyone who's reading into the VCs or the special exception says, oh, right, timing,
that's
we're
good.
supposed to cover that. Not that anyone, right, it's just that, as you said, there are things that are important to the IA and the CA, and we want to make sure that those
Yeah.
have a good chance of
That's
that
fine
those
with
things
us.
will get included.
Since we're talking about construction and Phase 2, where Phase 2 is right now, it's mostly parking lot on that site.
Right.
Right.
So are you
Parking
gonna
there.
use that like for construction parking and
That's
stuff
what I
like
asked
that?
them,
Yep.
yeah.
and
Oh, I didn't
staging.
hear you say that.
Yep.
last.
But it might not be the same, the answer was the asphalt might not.
The grade will change.
Yeah, yeah.
The grade,
Yeah.
so you're gonna have to, okay.
We'll have to regrade that pad as we develop the site, because it'll be hitting the roads will be in, like, it'll become a parcel with roads all around it.
Yeah,
or
some of the
alleys around it.
lower part too is just kind
Yeah.
of different. So, and then what will Phase 2 look like when Phase 1 is open? Is that just gonna be a fenced-in area?
It's a good question, so, and I'm
Because,
happy
I
to.
mean, it's like right at the, kind of one of the entrances.
Yeah, I'm
Right,
happy to
but-
put that in here if you'd like, so, and I'm sorry that I keep using Pike and Rose as a reference, but it's a good reference point. So, at Pike and Rose, as part of our site plan approval, we had a temporary plan approved for all the leftover places that weren't built in the first phases. And so they showed a parking layout with, greenery around them, and we had construction fencing allowed in certain places, so we could do that as part of our SEE application and that approval, and show what the temporary condition would be.
That would be great, because I just have different concepts in my head of what this might look like, and I think that we want it to be semi-attractive and maybe useful in some sort of manner.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think we've decided, so one way to do it would be,
Outdoor
it becomes
roller
surface parking.
We could go roller
Um,
skating.
The other, but a nice surface parking lot, or the other option is it could be, it could just be that it's a field, and it's maybe used for events. The fear there is then it becomes a dog park, and then people get upset when you take it away, so.
Oh, you don't want
So
to
we have
put
to be a little
something in
careful.
there you're
Well,
going to
and
take away.
actually, I don't really want a dog park. Because unless you build them properly, they're just very polluting.
Mhm. Okay.
But, yeah, I agree. There's potential for that because it's so visible. There is potential to have that be somewhat, like some kind of amenity, right?
Right.
As open space. I don't know what it could be used for, but some thought should be paid to what that should be.
Yeah.
Maybe that, or at least what we don't want it to be, because I think that having it in the concessions, because we don't know exactly how long that may be there. It may be
You don't
some
want a
time.
bunch of rubble there.
We don't know.
Well, if it's
and so-
short-term parking and some green space, that's not a
Right.
bad
Yeah.
thing for the short term.
Parking is probably like the default. I think there may be something better
Yeah.
than parking that could be done there. That could be more of an amenity. You have all the kids that are, walking back and forth from school. There could be some type of more open space there. Right now that, there's nothing like that in that, I don't know, this could be something interesting, so.
So my
Yeah.
sense, we're obviously not gonna wanna
Think about it.
spend a ton of money on something temporary, so
Right,
I think
right.
the two options would probably be either it's an asphalt parking lot, but nicely done with green around it, or it's just kind of a grass space that could be used for
Yeah.
Even
other
a grass
stuff.
field is fine, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I think your caution is good, though. If you make it into something nicer.
Right, then people get
No,
upset.
you don't want to spend
And
the
then
money,
you
but.
take it away, people are like,
People are not gonna like
well,
that.
even if you make it a green field of grass and it disappears, people are like, oh, that was the green space.
How big is
So
that
I think we have to be
rectangle?
careful.
It's about 2 acres, or an acre and a half.
You could do a lot with that. You could have temporary fields there, you could have passive
Definitely-
recreation,
I
more
definitely don't want
more,
temporary, because then you do get into like,
yeah, more active stuff. I don't know,
Right.
there's stuff you could, you
Well,
make
maybe
it
a
clear
big
that it's
sign
temporary.
that says temporary.
You make it clear that it's
This
temporary.
is temporary.
I don't know.
Look,
People-
it's very
okay.
clear that we want this parcel to be office space if possible.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
But
It could be
Yeah,
passive
I don't
recreation, it could
disagree
just be a
with
place
it.
for
You
people
don't
to
disagree
hang
with
out.
it, but you give someone a field for a year, they might be very upset when it's torn
No, I
down.
agree, maybe passive recreation is better than active,
Yeah.
but still, there's things you could do.
Okay.
Just
What are some of the others?
we talked about this a little bit, this new Street B and Haycock intersection. Staff is talking about a full signal there instead of just the Hawk signal. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
yeah, so we've just started hearing about that.
Surprise.
Yeah, so I need to look, I don't even know what that means from a cost perspective. I need to just look at that. If to the extent it's not a lot more expensive, it's not a problem in our view. The question is whether it would make more sense to wait till Virginia Tech redevelops, because that will change. So one thing we can't
Yeah.
do, because of the slope here, we're not gonna be able to get a crosswalk on the north side of this intersection in because of the
Right.
way
Right,
the outlets
right,
work and the
right.
slope. So, we don't know what they're gonna do here yet, but my sense is they're gonna redevelop this whole block, and so that might change the sidewalk dynamics, it might change that intersection to some extent. So I don't know, maybe that becomes something that's done during phase 2, or something that's done in coordination with Virginia Tech. But let me look into
That
that.
would probably
and-
be a good idea to include it in phase 2.
Yeah, or let me at least understand what the cost of it is. I just-
Unless
I just
unless
don't
the
know.
traffic data says that something like that is needed now in phase 1, and I'm speaking totally serious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we
know.
Unless it's needed. Who made that comment? Who is that coming from, our transportation planner? So if the city's professional is recommending an improvement like that, and we should
I
understand why.
think so,
We
yeah.
should look at it very carefully.
That would
um,
help, with all the crossings up there, too.
So, again,
That whole Haycock Road is really dangerous during,
That's a
big
perfect
part of the
segue
day.
into the next one, which is
Right.
Route 7 and Haycock intersection. The geometry should be realigned and tightened. What, I don't know what staff had in mind, or if you're is this one if you're familiar with?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it too. So
Okay.
we did study this. There's 4 feet, at most you could get about 4 feet out of that cross-section. The only issue would be, we are gonna have to, our left turn in here is gonna take a good portion of that median. So, which, tightens the space a little bit.
that gives more stacking space.
So so the 4, to the extent there's a desire for that 4 feet to be realigned, one idea we had originally was, should it be a bike lane, but then you only have a bike lane in one direction, which doesn't really work.
No.
you know, it could just be something where you stripe the road narrower and you have a space on the side. In the ideal world, it would have been parking, actually. That would have been great if we could have had 8 feet, but it's not 8 feet. So with 4 feet, I'm not 100% sure what the benefit of spending the money on restriping and realigning that is, other than just making the curb bigger and, or more a big 4-foot planting strip on the edge there, which could happen.
Just for jogging memories of the planning commission, I think it was one of the Kensington went in, that we were successful as staff working with the developer to pull that curb out. And so it resulted in a larger sidewalk than otherwise would have been possible. And so that's one of the things we've been looking at the staff level as redevelopment occurs along the city's major streets, to ensure that we are getting a standard cross-section for these travel lanes. If you look at travel lanes throughout the city, sometimes broad as 13 feet, sometimes
Right.
it's 12 feet, sometimes it's 11 feet. And the problem with 13-foot lanes is that they encourage people to go faster. That's only 1 foot short of what you've got on 495.
Right.
And I don't think that's the look that the city's going for, is lanes of that width. And so the goal is, as part of redevelopment, to get lanes down to 11 feet. It would be nice to get confirmation from the planning commission on that, but also to make sure that turning radii, the sharpness of the curves are set appropriately. That the design goal should be to allow appropriately sized trucks to make those turns safely, but not make them so wide that they actually end up pushing the crosswalk and pushing pedestrians out of visible spaces.
Right.
The other thing we could look at, and I think there were some early designs that showed this, the way those crosswalks and those medians meet, the idea of extending the nose of the median through the crosswalk. That's seen as a pedestrian safety feature because it guides folks who are driving to actually drive into the intersection and make a turn versus sort of veer diagonally across.
Okay.
So if you go to neighboring Arlington County, you'll see in most of their recent roadway projects that they've incorporated these features: narrower lanes, medians that come through the crosswalk, and tighter turns.
So is that one, I think maybe we work with staff. So the MVTA grant is obviously going to be responsible for spending some of the money on this intersection, so we're already coordinating with staff on that.
Yeah.
So maybe we have a few work sessions with all of you and figure out what's the right place to put it, whether it goes in the median or it goes on the curb, or I don't know where the utilities sit there yet to understand the impact it might have, but let's just coordinate with all of you.
Yeah, and I
figure it
remember
out.
from an earlier meeting at the staff level that there were problems with underground utilities along West Broad, so I imagine we'll run into things and how we
Right.
deal with that, we'll work that out.
But the goal in mind of making it tight and having the autos go slower is.
Yeah, I think, some of this goes back to the city's vision for transportation. The city's mobility for all modes plan says to continue accommodating vehicles, but don't do more than that. That if they're already getting through, then that's fine. You can use that leftover space to better the experience, either for design or pedestrians or folks on bikes, whatever it is. So continue to accommodate autos, but don't do more than that.
Okay.
Again, coordination.
Mhm.
That whole area is going to be critical.
Absolutely. Well, and this is an opportunity to set that gateway intersection into the city. The city's done a wonderful treatment on its portion of the intersection. And so this is an opportunity to try and carry some of that aesthetic to the other pieces.
Agreed.
All right, the last one, of this list, cycle track
The
width.
continuing battle over the width of the cycle track. So this has been asked of us, we've said no, it's been asked of us, we've said no, it's been asked of us, we've said no. So it started as a 4 foot in both directions, we're at 5 foot in both directions. So this is
Where's their cycle track?
so there's a cycle track on Street B, which is the northern, let me get to the image, here we go.
Mustang Way.
So Mustang Alley up here.
Okay.
So this is our development here. We're looking towards Haycock. You have our streetscape, the 2-car lanes, and then we used to have street parking. We got rid of the street parking and added a cycle track to get bikes all the way to the school, which is great. There's a 3-foot buffer here with a stanchion separating the bikes from the traffic. There's then 5 foot of bike lanes in each direction, so 10, and then you have another 1 foot 6. Does that say? I think
Does.
to the curb. So in total, from the stanchion to the curb, you have 13 feet of space, which is, I mean, in a suburban condition, we see the 6 foot being fine. In an urban condition, I mean, I think at the wharf, they're 4 feet in each direction. But the question is, when you have 5 foot in each direction plus a buffer on each side, you're really accomplishing the 6 foot desire or request from staff. And, you know, why are we taking even more space there? You know, I mean, we can do it by making the buffer smaller between the cars and bike lanes, but there's a limited amount of land. If the issue here is this, if you go back to the plan. So the city owns the land all the way up to here, even though Virginia Tech has a very steep loading dock that comes up here. So the issue is there's a limited amount of work we can do within that green space. So in the ideal world, we would just build all the sidewalks on that side. We would create that improvement today so that this street on the northern side was done. But until this building is taken out of commission, it's difficult to do that. So we know that this development is going to happen at some point very soon. And so there's going to be a chance to modify the streetscape north of what we're providing as a bike lane as well, which could create opportunities for broad sidewalks there and street trees and everything we want to see. So we have somewhat of a tight space to deal with already, and so we're providing, we think, an adequate bike facility, and I think it's just a disagreement between us and staff. And we have submitted the NACTO guidelines, the way we've interpreted it, to show that it's appropriate at 5 feet in each direction. But
That looks
Most of
appropriate
the-
to me, because I think you have that 1.5 foot on one side and you have the 3 foot
Right.
on the other, so you basically do have more buffer on the side of it.
right.
Most of
Yeah.
the WNOD is, it can't be more than 5 feet on each side.
Yeah, it's currently 10 feet, and I think the Nova Parks is working to widen that to
Yeah,
either 11.
but right now, I mean, it's like miles and miles and miles of 5 feet.
Could you go to the aerial photo
Sure.
of that whole area?
The aerial photo,
Of-
you mean the section?
Yeah,
This drawing?
nah. Well, of the whole.
The 3D perspective of the whole project, that?
Yeah, well, okay. What's going to be interesting, and it has nothing to do with this development, but man alive, to develop down to that, to the stadium is going to be something else. That's a huge slope.
Yeah, so their property
That's
line, I
huge.
believe, is at the top of the slope.
Yeah, right.
So their development would be from the top of the slope over this way. I think that's where the parcel
Yeah.
boundary is.
My God.
But I'll let them speak for themselves.
Yeah, that's going to be a biggie, but they're going to have to interface with the schools at that point on
Right.
something, or
Yeah.
with the city.
Yeah, and they are, Virginia Tech has reached out to the city to have a kickoff coordination meeting later this week, so that's starting.
Wow. And the sycamore tree already died, so that's not going to be a problem.
So, Mr. Sartor, we actually still own that property that Virginia
Right.
Tech is on, correct?
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
Yes.
sorry.
Yeah,
Because you
for the
keep
time
saying the
being.
property, like, that is our property.
They have a right to buy it at a set price. though.
Oh, I know they have the right to buy it, it's a dumb contract, but yes.
Stupid
But we
contract.
still currently own it.
And they never let us park on it.
All right,
Never
so
let us
Worst
do
thing
anything.
Fox ever did.
we finished the staff's questions. What we're trying to do this evening, though I think we've covered a lot of it, we were supposed to be this SEE deals specifically with the uses on the site, which we did talk about in the voluntary concessions, the height issues, location, I assume that's location of buildings, the uses, I wrote that twice. Transportation, utilities, and infrastructure. Does anybody have questions or comments on those elements? Because those are specific to this document.
Utilities. Boy.
We talked about uses we didn't want on the site.
And we talked about transportation a lot.
We did, I agree. How about the height? We haven't discussed the height. Everybody all
I
right?
think you're
Yeah, I don't have
having
issues
Sun
with that.
Tribe take a look at the shadow
Mhm.
of them, so.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's, you added more shadow studies to it as
We did,
well.
yep.
And I think taking a look at the hotel is, a really good idea. Just the changes in heights there, and any step downs would be really good. But
And the
utilities.
big height is supposed to be in phase 2, right? That's like where the,
And the senior housing building in phase 1 is, oh, yeah, that's on. The senior housing building in phase 1 is relatively high as well. And then, yes, phase 2, both those buildings would be, those would be the closest to hitting the 15-foot floor cap, depending on how tall they end up, somewhere in the 10 to 15-story range.
But the shadow study goes over in the shared parking garage, so.
Oh, no.
No.
Paul, what'd you do?
I don't
That's an
know.
Apple ID.
All right, well,
So.
Last time I solved it by
Guess that's
rebooting
the
the
end of the
whole
meeting.
setup.
We're close anyway.
Well,
Because it's.
Right, exactly. That's-
I think enough people have it on their laptops.
right.
Yeah.
Well, we
Is that frozen as well, the computer there? It was starting to freeze when I wasn't able to move back to different sheets.
Oh, that's not what I wanted.
See what that does.
All right. Can we talk about the parking real quick? We were told that you're going to ask for a parking reduction, first of
Right.
all. And the second is, I didn't have a real good sense of how the flow of cars are working underneath the buildings.
Okay.
I just,
Yeah.
I know it's happening, and you even made a comment on Wednesday night that
We
said
haven't even
that
looked at
even if you close down the central
Right.
commons area, the flow of parking can continue. So just
Right.
Ah.
curious about how that
Nicely
works.
Luckily, we have this presentation. Where I can show you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, there's, have you ever, I don't know if you've ever gone to Mad Fox and parked in the garage in the building there.
Uh-huh.
People hate that garage bitterly, and because the turns are so tight in
You
it.
know, and the spaces are
Oh,
too
all of
narrow,
them
and
are.
the columns. It's
I don't know, I
rough
just go to the
block.
bottom and take up 2 spaces.
that's an example of how not to design it. So
Because the
yeah,
bottom of that is pretty empty, so.
Oh, yeah.
But
There
no one
should
wants
be
to
no-
drive all the way down.
there should be no waivers of parking space width and size, and no
I
columns
know.
intruding into
The
spaces.
best garage,
Yeah,
I
so
think.
fortunately, some of these problems have already been experienced and addressed. So,
Yes.
Yeah.
to your point,
There we go.
parking lot widths are now mandated to be 9 feet. You can't include the columns inside the
Yeah.
spaces. And so I think when the city updated its commercial parking regulations a
Hill's
couple years
pretty big
ago,
parking lot.
the idea was to
Hill's
get
fine.
more usable spaces.
Right.
And so the way that was done
This
was
garage
provide
is-
flexibility on
don't do it
the
like this.
quantity,
Don't
but
The one
Yeah.
here,
improve
terrible.
quality.
Yeah, we do have good garages. The Lincoln's good, the Pearson's good. This one, the bottom level, it just, people are angry at that one because they
Terrible.
keep scraping on the metal,
Oh,
but
my God.
it's terrible.
I parked my truck in it a couple of times. I had no trouble.
Yeah, so parking is critical, obviously, and for retail to be successful, it's critical as well. So, and visibility within the garage is critical. So, and all of the team you've hired we all have a lot of expertise in this area. So you'll see a lot of those details during SCE site plan when we get into the details of that. Right now, this is obviously very conceptual, but the concept is there's really 2 main publicly accessible garages. You have the big garage here, which would be your general retail parking, the hotel parking, and the office parking, and the school parking, sorry. You then have a below-grade parking garage here under Block A, which would be dedicated for the grocery store. That's all the publicly accessible parking. So, for example, the condo buildings will have their own parking that will come in off the alley, but, for all intents and purposes, unless you're living there, you would never go in there. The residents of this building will have their own parking as well, which would come in off of this street. You would never go in there either. So those 2 garages, the big one for the grocery store and the big one for shared use events, are here and here. For the grocery store, that parking entrance comes in off of Street A. And so the importance of having this traffic light, I can use the pointer, this is better. The importance of having this traffic light be full movement is to get cars into that grocery store parking and out of that grocery store parking without them even having to go to the main street. Similarly, for this garage, while we do expect during normal times cars will come down the street and filter into that entrance here, or potentially come this way across and in, or come even this way up and in, we've designed it so that there's an entrance here off of this alley. So that would be, if you're going westbound on 7, you should, once you've been here once, bypass that street and come in right here. And then you would go out this way. Or you would come, remember this is an evening or a weekend when we have an event, so that road is open. You could come around this way to get to this entrance as well, or to get to this entrance here. There's 3 ways in and out of this garage at 2 different levels, all of which are accessible when we close down this entire area for an event. So what's nice about the main street here is other than this alley cut here, there's no curb cuts for loading or parking entrances or anything like that. It's just continuous retail that entire length. And that means that when we close this down for events, it's fully a closed event. You put up some cones and bollards and you can have a huge festival on 2 acres and all the parking still functions. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't have more traffic if you have a huge event, because just by the nature of having a huge event, even just rubberneckers driving on Route 7 are going to slow down and look and see what's going on. But it will accommodate it quite nicely. And then the parking can come in here. The second part of this is once we continue this Main Street to the WMATA parcel, or whether it's Virginia Tech continues their development, and this connects to the big WMATA garage, there's 1,200 spaces that are basically empty evenings and weekends. And so when we have big events here, you have a secondary, essentially shadow parking deck that's less than a quarter mile away, where once this is a great main street, walking along that main street to the big event will be nothing. It'll be a 7-minute really attractive walk. So that's the concept we came up with the whole design. The goal is not to have cars have to come onto the main street to get into the garages if they don't want. Some cars will still do that, but it'll function really nicely.
And what's the number of on-street parking in that area?
There's about 40 on-street spaces.
That's what I thought I remembered.
Yeah, on the streets.
And what sort of parking reduction are you asking for?
So the parking reduction is probably the most confusing slide of the entire SE application. Let me go to that. And it's a shame that all great mixed-use spaces are governed by parking. That's the main denominator for how you design a project is how the parking works, which one day will hopefully change. But okay, so this is the parking diagram. So to walk you through it, because it's a little confusing. The yellow are spaces where we could envision on-street parking. It doesn't mean there will be necessarily. I'm sure we'll have to have a space or 2 lost as we get close to the intersection here. And then also we've actually removed the on-street parking on Street B now. That now is bike lanes. So, but that's where on-street parking would make sense. We then have the black outlines are all the parking structures. And so these are below grade parking decks, potentially below grade and podium here because of the hill. This is an above grade deck, as you all know, and then this is largely below grade, potentially above grade and hidden by the building, but potentially below grade. That hasn't been decided yet. This garage here, so that's the garage locations. The minimums and maximums are governed in this chart right here. So the salmon color squares are the city's current requirements for each of those uses. So office, retail, grocery, you go down the list. If I were to take office, for example, right now your requirement is 1 per 450 square feet. No, 400? 450, right? 450. Yeah, sorry. So that's 2.2 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet of office. We would like to deliver, we think office, we actually need to be a little bit more than your standards to attract the right type of tenant in phase 1. So we've said 1 per 333 square feet or 3 spaces per 1,000. And so the way we handled this chart, because we want to have long-term flexibility and we don't know exactly where we're going to end up, is we took the city standard and either made it a min or a max in each use. And then we recommended our alternate as the min and the max. So for office, the range would be the city standard of 2.2 per 1,000 to what we've requested of 3 per 1,000. And in the SE site plan, as long as we come in with something in that range, then that would be approvable essentially, because you guys have already approved that range. Similarly for retail, we actually have gone a little lower than your typical requirement. We're at 1 per 3, and you typically have 1 per 3.3, I think. So that would be the range of parking for retail as well. It's a little bit broader range. Grocery, you have a minimum of 1 point, I can't even read it from here, I'm sorry, guys, for all of you. 1 per 200, so you have 4 per thousand, we're asking for a range of 4 to 5 per thousand. And then for residential is the one where we're asking for less parking, and that's because we want to take advantage of the metro and car share and Uber and all that. And so we're at 0.8 spaces per unit versus yours is more of a bedroom count methodology. But once again, we've done it as a range. So if we get into this process and based upon all of our research, we find out that, you know, we're being too optimistic on parking, we'd have the ability to be within that range, and you would approve that at SCE site plan. So that's how the parking works for each of the uses. The one where we went the most under your requirements is hotel, and that's based upon talking to a whole bunch of garage operators, and that's changed dramatically in recent years. So you may want to think about updating your own code for hotel parking. It's just based on the fact that almost everybody now takes Ubers to get to when they're staying in hotels. There's very few people renting cars and driving to a hotel in Falls Church. So so the parking, you probably know this from your own hotels that have a lot of vacant parking, but that's just, you know, it's just not needed anymore. So we reduced that a lot.
So
I'm
will
really
we have?
surprised you're over parking. For those, especially given where this site is. I always thought that our parking ratios were too high.
Yeah, the only ones that we'd be over parking is office and grocery. Everything else we're requesting for less parking than yours. And the grocery is based upon feedback from specific tenants of what they need to do a deal. Whether they need that parking or not is, of course, a question. And then the office is, our sense on office is when we get to phase 2, we may be coming in for a major reduction in office parking. If the site's working really well and things are good and the main street is connecting all the way to Metro, we shouldn't need as much parking for the second phase office
But you don't
building.
think you can make these other uses work on this site next to the metro station with the cities?
So I'm going to break it into whether it will work and whether I can get a tenant to agree to sign a lease. So I believe it will work even with less office parking, 100%. I don't know that I will get the anchor tenants that you guys want in a Class A office building unless I have that option. And unfortunately, those decisions tend to be made by CEOs who always drive to work. So now that doesn't mean that once we open that building, if we have excess parking, all it means is we'll build less phase 2 parking, right? We'll have more spaces in that phase 1 garage, so it's a little bit of a fail-safe. The nice thing about having that office parking is even if we're overbuilding office parking slightly, when the school has events, when we have big events, when the restaurants, evenings and weekends, or the music venue is really active, having that overflow parking is important regardless. And we're putting the excess parking in the cheapest structure, the above grade precast deck, so it's having less of an impact on land value. So we thought through it a lot. My initial instinct was to try to go less than 3 per thousand for office, but based upon every single broker we've talked to in the market, they're like, you're already trying to convince tenants that typically would go to Tyson's to come here, and you don't want to be doing that with a hand tied behind your back. Even though I agree with you philosophically, and I live in Adams Morgan and have, totally urban. But that, and obviously if by the time we come in for SC site plan, we have an anchor tenant for that building that is willing to require less parking, we would then come in and ask for that.
So at the site plan, we would have a better sense of this. Not right now, it's
We
a
would
range
lock it
to
in.
give you options,
Yep.
but we wouldn't have a real sense of where we're at.
At SC site plan, we'll come in with, this building will have, we'll probably still ask for a range of 380 to 400 spaces or something, but yeah, it'll lock it down to actual space counts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but generally, I'm pretty open to parking reductions requests, and
Yeah.
I've heard that from the other members here of the commission that we're,
Yeah.
especially given the location of the site. So generally speaking, we're not trying to tie up developers' money in parking spaces.
Right.
So,
Agreed.
do we have any other questions on these other?
Yeah, in fact, on that issue of parking, I'm, hearing the options that, use of the metro garage and so forth. I'm still wondering, why we're pushing so hard for 187 spaces for the school when that costs us $1.2 million, when 150 would seem to work. I mean, you mentioned the 3T bus, and, transit into the site, the upgraded pedestrian and bike paths and everything. Just, that's a lot of money that the city could use right now. I realize I'm probably not joined by too many people in that, but.
I'm with you.
but I just don't
If we're
know.
trying to do something transformational, that would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's said, you know, other than the school, we want more parking, but they seem to believe that they have some real requirements on that end, and their
Yeah.
employees and whatever events, but when we started this process, I know there was lots of conversations
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Well, the
Less
initial
parking.
feasibility study by Perkins and Eastman was, they went and did a very careful study of other urban schools, particularly in Arlington. They came back and they recommended 350. Anyway, I don't know if it's cast in stone, that decision or not, but it just doesn't seem like there's been much of a discussion other than on the school side, just saying, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have that for them, but there are bigger issues here, and it just, unfortunate that couldn't have been a broader discussion on what's in the best interest of the city.
Again, though, I think with the, if you're up there for any huge events or anything, it's really crazy tight. That's the only thing. I think that pushing that, and as it gets bigger, I
well, we
guess-
have plenty of time to talk about that, parking at the next
Right.
phase. Any other questions? We have,
Oh, yeah.
you have other questions?
Just one.
All right, just one, I can,
Well,
let's do just one.
having listened
I'd
and
like to see it.
absorbed
Yeah,
and heard different opinions and sometimes different answers. Explain how you're going to, again, about the micro units versus the regular size units, and if you're going to put them in separate areas and stuff like that, or is it going to be integrated?
Yeah, so as part of our, the modification to our IA that we got approved by the council, that was approved by the council, I should say, in February, we asked for an additional 100,000 square feet of residential that has to be either condominium or micro rental units. And part of that came out of this idea we think will work in this market of micro rental units. We haven't, at the SE site plan stage, we'll figure out how much of that 100,000 is condo and how much is micro. We haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. But the thought is, let's say it was a 75,000 square foot micro rental building. It would have units that are typically about 80% of the size of a typical unit. So a smaller studio, a smaller one bedroom. The IA has maximums for how the it has averages for what that can be at a maximum. So we can go even smaller. And we're studying, when we get to this over the summer, we would do a market research study to figure out what those units should be. So, but as an example of what they're for, when I was in graduate school, I lived in a 400 square foot studio in Philadelphia that was perfect for my needs, that was insanely easy to keep clean, and was less expensive because on a per foot basis, it was the same rent that I would pay somewhere else, but it was a smaller space. And so the idea here is to try to attract a younger talent or younger folks to live in the city and to provide them places that they can afford within the city. And so to the extent you can live in a great place above great retail, walking distance to retail, maybe not even own a car, and live in a much simpler, smaller space, you could have a studio for, $1,000 to $1,200 a month versus $1,500 to $1,600, or a one bedroom for $1,400 to $1,500 instead of a one bedroom for $2,000 or more. So it provides a more, you'd kind of call it a workforce housing option.
Right.
On the smaller scale. And it can also work not just for young people, I should say, also for retirees, people who are widowed that don't want to have the same maintenance or upkeep, or a couple that wants to live in a one bedroom that's smaller. So that's the concept. The idea right now would be, it would be one of two. It would either be on a separate block from the current residential rental building. We'd have to figure out how to fit that within this plan. So it could be that it's, we swap some of the uses here to make that work. Or what we've been thinking about is we would have essentially two residential rental buildings on the same block, on Block A, and one with an entrance probably somewhere around here, one with an entrance down here. And the more typical multifamily residential building would probably be the larger building, or would be the larger building with most of the amenity spaces. The smaller building would be, it would have younger amenities, or amenities geared towards a younger market, but they would each have the use of each other's amenities. So, if somebody wanted to go use the pool in the other building, they could. So they would be marketed as different buildings. They would look and feel from a design perspective like different buildings. They might have similar overlap in fire, life safety, or things, or exit stairs, things of that sort if they're on the same block. And if they're on separate blocks, they wouldn't. So, but they would
It's
feel like two
mostly
different buildings.
rental too, that's what you told me.
And they would be rental, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's all. I was just gonna make one other suggestion for the parking garage,
Mhm.
down underneath the, grocery store.
Okay.
Have breakout lanes for carts to go to your cars.
Okay.
There's none in the Harris Teeter. And so you can't get a shopping cart between two parked cars.
Got it. Okay.
And just,
pedestrian path even with.
yeah, that's what I mean, okay?
We don't have that in our current plan. I got to think
But it's
about
really a
that.
good idea,
But I don't think you're saying, not along the bay, but through the bay.
through
A
it.
spot in the middle of the road.
I guess
Yeah.
part of that's gonna have to do with the grocery store and what they feel like they need,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
But,
it could just be striping within the, what I wouldn't want to do is widen the drive lane, but you could create a
No, no,
striping
no, and
within
I
it.
don't mean
No, no,
that.
she's talking about like in between the road, like
I'm
the-
talking,
if you're parked like
vertical,
beyond a road
perpendicular.
and you're trying to get a cart.
You can't get there from here.
Between the
And
cars.
so if you're parked way over on the other side of the garage, you gotta
You
go
gotta
all
go
the way
around.
around.
Yeah, thinking about the Harris Teeter site, if there were, say, a
Oh, I
large
see what you're
crosswalk
saying.
coming out of the door.
There probably should be
Like
one
an
there.
alley.
Okay.
Yeah.
Pedestrian
Yeah.
alley.
Lessons learned.
That's not a bad idea.
Got it, got
We
it,
could
got
just
it.
move
Just
in
thought I'd
and
mention
take
it.
the elevator, it's no big deal.
We'll reserve a
Okay,
space,
show off.
reserve a space for you right in front. No, yeah, we haven't gotten that far
It's
along.
really-
Okay, planning
it's-
commission
it's-
I go
spaces.
three times
There
a
you go.
day, so it doesn't, I don't need that.
Reserve planning
Keep
commission
going.
spaces, that's another idea. I like that idea.
No, but it.
Say reserve
it's-
planning commission
No,
spaces.
I
Yeah.
haven't. I've never actually been there.
That sounds good. We'll
Oh,
put that in, we'll put that in
it's
the
a lot of
consent.
fun, actually.
That'd go over well.
All right, it is 10
That's
o'clock.
all,
We
that's the only
have,
question I have. Aren't you proud of me?
What do you mean, we had others?
we had, you had 100. You don't get credit for asking the last one as your only
Oh,
question. This was, we don't have to take any actions, this is the work session. If we have other questions, we certainly have time to discuss it next, or 2 weeks from now. But I think at this point, we got what we need. Staff got what they need.
Yeah. So I think we heard some highlights today, and we'll obviously include those in your comments, but I think what I heard is that Planning Commission would like staff to prepare a motion for a positive recommendation at the April 1st meeting.
I would like that, yes.
And could I just add that between staff and the developers, I know it was difficult to put together all these joint boards and commission meetings, but I think they were all very nicely handled, and I think they were very worthwhile. The last one was the best, absolutely the best. And, but, I just think it was a great idea, and, I know it was expediency, and it seemed to work.
Come to the Chamber of Commerce tomorrow and you can hear it again.
Oh,
Or
nice.
Friday morning.
That'll be my birthday lunch tomorrow. We'll be presenting to the chamber.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Fun birthday.
I would, I want to sort of echo those. Thank you for all the time you've spent on not just the coordination on that, but,
Yeah.
to make 6 presentations in like 13 days or something is, I know, a lot of effort, but really helpful for the community, and I think we got a lot of important information at that point. And
Yeah, I
I learned a
appreciate
lot on
that.
Wednesday, personally.
Staff, I mean, Carly was amazing in setting all this up, and then all the different people from staff cycling through to handle the different meetings. It's been a really good cooperative relationship, and we appreciate all that. I would say for your future projects, I mean, 6 in 2 weeks is a lot, but to the extent you have the ability to combine some of these and have it be like maybe it's 4 weeks and it's, 2 a week for 4 weeks or something, it is much better from the developer side to have it all condensed in 1 month or something, so you can get all the feedback and respond, but it was really well done on staff's part.
All right, well, thank you very much. Well, you're not rid of us yet. Soon. Almost. All right, well, that, I believe, concludes our meeting. So, nothing else? We're adjourned.